A window opens to nowhere, yet reveals everything. Welcome to Mystery Tales. I am your host, Axon. Tell me where you're listening from. Your comments keep this community alive. I always enjoy reading them. Now into the mystery. In the autumn of '89, when the days shortened with a kind of reluctant haste, and the evenings drew down upon Baker Street like a curtain of soot, it was my habit to take a late stroll after supper, partly for health, partly to loosen the stiffness that lingering service in Afghanistan had left in my joints. London, at such hours, possesses a character all its own. The fog gathers in low, woolly banks along the pavements, the lamps burn as if seen through smoked glass, and the wheels of passing hansoms whisper rather than clatter, so that one moves as in a dream where everything is muffled but watchful. On one such evening, I returned to find our sitting room ablaze with light and alive with that peculiar atmosphere which always attended upon a case. The fire was high, the brass of the coal scuttle and fender had been recently polished, and on the mantel stood a half-dozen pipes in various stages of disassembly. Holmes, in his long grey dressing-gown, was stretched upon the sofa with his thin hands folded behind his head, while beside him, in the chair nearest the hearth, sat Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard, his ferret-like face sharpened by anxiety and the ruddy heat of the room. A third man stood upon the rug, hat in hand, glancing from one to the other with nervous deference. Holmes acknowledged me with a languid wave of his fingers. "Ah, Watson, you are precisely on time. I was about to ask whether the human frame could sustain itself on the odd combination of military punctuality and matrimonial distraction." "I have neither marriage nor distraction to plead," said I, smiling, "unless you count your habit of locking the door behind me and leaving no clue to your intentions. Which proves only that you are improving. Sit down. Lestrade has brought us a little puzzle, and Mr. Theo Hargreaves here is kind enough to allow his nerves to be used as an accompaniment." The stranger bowed. He was a well-made man of perhaps 35, with dark hair brushed back in a manner at once careful and restless. His clothes were of good, if sober cut, and there was an air about him which I have observed in men of commerce who have suddenly found themselves shoved into the spotlight of misfortune. His eyes were bloodshot from want of sleep, but alive with earnestness. Lestrade, who had been frowning at the fire as though it were personally responsible for his predicament, looked up at my entrance. "Evening, Doctor. I'm glad you're in. It's one of them cases that makes a man wish he'd stuck to traffic duty. Simple as a nursery tale and twice as nasty." Holmes turned his head slightly toward him. "Nursery tales are full of wolves, stepmothers, and locked doors. This one, I take it, has a window." Lestrade gave a short grunt. "There you are, jumping to it already. Yes, a window. And if you can tell me how it opened, you'll save me from a week of men sniggering in the yard." Mr. Hargreaves made a helpless motion with both hands, as though the very word window had reduced him to that final impotence which grief can bring. "If I might begin, Mr. Holmes," said he, voice tight, "I have no wish to exaggerate, but my sister's death hangs on that question. It is the hinge on which everything turns." Holmes rose in his indolent way, went to the side table, and poured a measure of claret into a glass, which he then set untouched upon the mantel. "You will do best to exaggerate nothing and omit nothing," said he. "Between those two virtues, truth generally contrives to squeeze itself into view. Now, Mr. Hargreaves, begin where you please." The man drew a breath and looked for a moment at the fire, perhaps to gather warmth enough to face the cold facts. "My sister, Clara Hargreaves, kept a small private school for young ladies in Hampstead. It is not a grand establishment, but it has been respectable these 15 years since our father died. She was 5 years my senior, and had rather the head for order that I lack. We were not rich, but we had comfort, and since my opinion in such matters is of little consequence, I will say only that she was one of the best women I have known." There was that in his tone which made a set of words into a portrait. I saw, as he spoke, a capable woman in black silk with a kindly severity and eyes that could soften for a child. 2 nights ago, he continued, I dined with her. It was my practice to take supper there on Wednesdays, for she insisted, in her absurd way, that I was too thin for a bachelor. I left at a little after 9. She was perfectly well, perhaps a trifle tired. The day had been a long one and the girls mischievous, but nothing beyond her ordinary life. She walked with me to the front door. We spoke of a new pupil expected on Monday. I recall it because she teased me for forgetting the girl's surname even as she pronounced it. When I left, she was smiling. His voice broke, and in that pause Lestrade shifted uncomfortably. Yesterday morning, Mr. Hargreaves went on, at 7:30, her maid, a solid country girl named Martha, went to wake her. My sister slept alone in a small room on the 2nd floor at the back of the house. Martha found the bed empty. Empty? I repeated involuntarily. Empty, said he, and his fingers tightened about his hat brim until the leather creaked. The sheets undisturbed, my sister's nightgown folded across the footboard as she always did before retiring, her pillow laid as though she had not touched it, yet her door was locked from the inside. Holmes's eyes, which had been half closed, opened a little more. Locked inside, and the bed untouched, said he. Continue. The room was otherwise wholly in order, the small writing desk, her Bible, her spectacles, everything as Martha had seen it the previous evening when she brought the candle. The only thing amiss was the window. It stood open. Lestrade leaned forward, elbow on knee. And there's no balcony or nothing beneath it. Not so much as a ledge a cat could sit on. It opens onto blank air. Mr. Hargreaves nodded miserably. It looks over the garden at the rear, only the garden is enclosed by a high brick wall, and beyond that is a steep descent to the railway cutting. The window is 2 floors above ground. There is no creeper, no pipe, no tree within reach, nothing. A chair beneath it? Asked Holmes. No, said Hargreaves quickly. Nothing moved. The maid is positive. The whole room, it was like the mistress had not entered it at all. And yet the door was locked? Yes, the key was in the lock, on the inside. Martha ran screaming. To Mrs. Toller, my sister's cook, and the 2 of them fetched the housekeeper. They sent for me at once. I arrived within 10 minutes. We forced the door. How? Said Holmes, abrupt now. With an iron poker. The lock splintered. I can show you the very marks, if you wish. When we entered, the cold air from the window struck us. I ran to it. There was no one in the garden. And the body? Lestrade put in, blunt as ever. It was found an hour later, said Mr. Hargreaves, swallowing. Down in the railway cutting, half hidden by brambles. There is a rough footpath along the top of the wall for the gardeners. It seems she fell or was thrown over there. Her skull was fractured. The doctor says she was dead before she reached the bottom. Holmes had crossed to the window, by which that evening's fog pressed like a damp hand. He pulled the curtain aside and peered out into the darkness, as if the Hampstead garden were before him, instead of a back street in Marylebone. Your sister could not have left that room by the door after you left, because it was locked from within when discovered. She could not have left by the window unaided, because it opens upon nothing, yet she did leave, for she was found dead outside. That is the triangle. What are the sides that make it? Lestrade gave an impatient little cough. We've had every fellow in the yard put his teeth to it, and all we get is jaw ache. There's 3 notions. 1, she wasn't in that room at all and never went to bed. 2, someone locked it after she left. 3, it's a trick with the key, but none of it fits straight. Holmes turned, and there was that faint, dangerous amusement upon his face which I had seen when a problem pleased him. 3 notions and not 1 observation, said he. But that is why Scotland Yard survives. It can live on notions. Mr. Hargreaves, did your sister have any callers after 9? None to my knowledge. The girls are housed in dormitories at the front. The servants sleep below. The schoolroom and drawing room are on the 1st floor. The back stair leads to the garden door, but that was bolted. Nothing was disturbed in the house. Any enemies? Any suitor? Any family dispute? Holmes's voice was careless, but his eyes were not. My companion has always possessed the rare ability to make a man feel that concealment is futile without appearing to demand confession. Mr. Hargreaves spread his hands again. Not a one. She lived for the school. She had no engagement and no quarrel. If she had anxiety, she did not share it with me. Holmes nodded as if this were a commonplace rather than a tragedy. And yet a woman does not die in a railway cutting because she lives for a school. Some other force must have nudged her. We shall visit Hampstead at once. Lestrade blinked. At once? It's near 10 o'clock. The dead are wonderfully patient, said Holmes, reaching for his coat. But so are murderers when given time to arrange their alibis. Better to be discourteous to sleep than polite to deception. Watson, bring your hat. I confess that the case, as it had been laid before us, created in me that mingled sensation of interest and unease which is the surest herald of strange events. A locked room without a prisoner is a paradox to warm any reasoner, but the cold of death lay upon it too, and death in a household of quiet girls and domestic routine seemed to me a thing unnatural, like blood upon lace. As we descended the stair and stepped out into Baker Street, the fog closed around us with a damp sigh. Holmes hailed a cab and gave the driver the direction to Hampstead at a pace that left no room for argument. Lestrade clambered in opposite, still grumbling under his breath, and Mr. Hargreaves, after a second of hesitation, followed, as a man follows a lantern into a mine. The gas lamps slid by in blurred halos. Holmes sat with his chin upon his chest, silent, the tip of his long nose outlined against the smeared light. I had learned by experience that this silence was never emptiness, but a kind of inward hunting, as though he loosed a pack of thoughts and listened for the first bark of a scent. At length he spoke, not to us particularly, but as if answering some question within. A window that opens to nowhere does not open itself. Therefore someone opened it. But the more curious matter is not the opening, but the nowhere. Lestrade snorted. Nowhere's just nowhere. Holmes's eyes flicked toward him in mild pity. Nowhere is always somewhere to the right mind, Inspector. We shall see whether this nowhere has a footprint. And so with that enigmatic remark hanging between us like a mist of its own, we rattled on toward the heights of Hampstead and the beginning of a mystery which, in its final unravelling, proved to be among the most subtle and chilling of any in which I have had the honour to assist my remarkable friend. The road to Hampstead rose gradually out of the city's murk, and with each turn of the wheels the air grew a shade clearer, though colder, as if London had shed one layer of its breath. A thin moon floated behind ragged clouds, lending a dull pewter to the hedgerows and the occasional wet glimmer to iron railings. Mr. Hargreaves sat hunched in the corner of the cab, clasping his hat between his knees, his gaze fixed on some private torment. Lestrade kept drumming his fingers upon the handle of his umbrella. Holmes remained motionless, save for the quick, bird-like movements of his eyes whenever we passed a lit window or an open public house. We drew up at last before a sober, gabled house set back from the lane behind a short gravel sweep. The building, though not large, had an air of scrupulous respectability, as if every brick had been kept in its proper moral place. A narrow garden lay to the rear, enclosed by the wall of which Mr. Hargreaves had spoken. Even from the front one could feel the hush of a school at night, the tall windows blank and disciplined, the blinds all at the same height, the very door-knocker polished as though to a rule. A maid admitted us, pale and trembling, and led us through a passage smelling of floor wax and extinguished lamps. We were met in the hall by a stout woman, with a cap askew from agitation. "Oh, Mr. Theo, thank the Lord you've brought someone," she cried. "The girls have been crying in their beds, and Martha's near out of her wits. It's not right, sir." "It's not natural, Miss Clara, so steady, so proper, and then gone like smoke." "This is Mr. Holmes," said Hargreaves, with a kind of desperate pride. "He will wish to see everything as it was." "Holmes?"
bowed in his brief fashion, already taking in with a glance the width of the hall, the worn patch of carpet by the coat stand, and a pair of muddy galoshes set neatly by the skirting. "Please conduct me to the room," said he. We ascended the back staircase. Its treads were narrow and precise, bearing that brown polish which comes of constant scrubbing. Halfway up, Holmes paused, stooping suddenly to touch the banister with the tips of his fingers. He sniffed once, like a man tasting the air, and went on without comment. I noted it, but dared not interrupt his train.
The door of Miss Hargreaves's chamber stood broken open and tied back with tape. A faint smell of lavender mingled with the colder scent of wet leaves that drifted in from outside. The room was small, almost ascetic. A narrow bed, white counterpane pulled tight, a washstand with a bowl and ewer aligned squarely, a little writing desk by the window with a blotter, 2 pens, and a letter frame containing a photograph of a stern gentleman whom I took to be their father. On a chair lay a folded nightgown. Everything spoke of the hand that had placed it there, conscientious to the last. Holmes entered softly, as though the dead still slept. He did not look first at the window, nor at the bed, nor even at the shattered lock. Instead, he stood in the centre of the floor and let his eyes move slowly about, resting on corners, on shadows. On the way, the candle gutter had left a trace of smoke beside the brass sconce. Then he dropped to one knee and began examining the boards. Lestrade cleared his throat. "We've been over it, Mr. Holmes. There's no signs of a struggle, no footsteps, no nothing." Holmes did not raise his head. "That is a remark about your method, Inspector, not about the room. Pray do not confuse the two." He took from his pocket a lens and moved it along the floor, inch by inch. After a moment he rose, brushed his knee and crossed to the desk. He opened the top drawer, ran his fingers lightly along the inside, and closed it again. He lifted the blotter, peered beneath, and replaced it. He tapped the inkwell, took up one pen, sniffed it, and set it down. "Your sister was right-handed," he observed to Mr. Hargreaves. "Yes. She wrote recently, as within an hour of retiring. Indeed, she always prepared her accounts at night." "You have seen the accounts?" "No, the police took any papers they thought relevant." Holmes glanced at Lestrade, who coloured slightly. "Everything in the desk is in my bag. Routine." "Quite so. Routine again." Holmes' voice was mild, but I saw Lestrade's jaw tighten. "Watson, you will notice the position of the chair. It stood pushed in, but not quite square to the desk." I frowned. "It is slightly angled." "Exactly. A woman who keeps her nightgown folded with military propriety does not leave her chair at a careless angle unless she rose quickly. She was interrupted." Mr. Hargreaves' eyes widened. "By what? She heard something?" "Or saw something. We must not decide until we have more. Now, the door!" He went to the splintered lock and studied it closely. The wood was burst inward, the brass plate bent. He touched the broken key, still in the lock on the inside, then put his shoulder to the door and tested it in its frame. It swung slightly even in its damaged state. "Old latch," he murmured. "Very old, and here—" He leaned close to the inner edge. "Yes, as I suspected, there is a second mark, lower down, where it has been pressed or pried." Lestrade stepped nearer. "Meaning?" "Meaning that it has been tampered with from this side, but not by your poker, which acted much higher. Someone tried to force it earlier, gently and unsuccessfully. Perhaps with a thin blade." Mr. Hargreaves gave a low cry. "Someone tried to break in?" "Or to break out," said Holmes, and moved on before the man could seize the distinction. He drew the curtain aside and examined the window. It was a casement type with a simple brass catch. He opened and closed it twice, listening. Then he crouched and ran his fingers along the sill. "There is no dust on the inner ledge," he said. "That's because Martha wipes it every morning," said the housekeeper, eager to defend her order. Holmes nodded. "A credit to her." yet there is dust on the outer lip. See here, Watson. A thin grey line along the edge, undisturbed save for this small smear. I bent and saw it, a faint crescent in the grime, as if a soft object had brushed across. A sleeve, I suggested. Possibly, or a glove. But the smear runs inward, not outward. He studied it again. So a hand came from outside to inside, not the reverse. Lestrade threw up his hand. Outside! But there's nothing outside.
It's a clear drop. Holmes did not answer him. He extended his body half out and looked down. The garden below lay in shadow. A few box shrubs marked its border like dark lumps. The wall stood black and severe at the far end. Beyond it, the earth fell away into deeper darkness where the railway cut. A train passed at that instant far below, its lamps sliding like a star through the trench, and its sound rose to us in a long subterranean roar. Holmes withdrew and shut the window. "Let us see the garden," said he. We went down and out by the rear door. The air had the wet, sharp smell of autumn leaves. A narrow path led beneath the back windows. Holmes walked it slowly, craning his neck upward to the second-floor casement. He paced the distance from wall to house, then from wall to cutting.
He examined the soil near the wall where a strip of grass gave way to bare earth. "There is no disturbance here newer than several days," he remarked. "The gardener comes on Tuesdays," said the housekeeper. "He was here yesterday." Holmes smiled faintly. "Then he is a man of light tread. Now to the wall." We approached it. It was high indeed, perhaps 10 feet, capped with uneven bricks and a scatter of broken bottle glass set in mortar. Holmes ran his hand along the top until he found a place where the glass had been crushed. "Ah," said he softly. "What is it?" cried Mr. Hargreaves. A small dark stain lay upon the brickwork, half washed by the night's damp. Holmes touched it with a gloved finger and held it to the light. "Blood," said he. Lestrade stared. "On the wall? But the body was down there." "Exactly. Which tells us that someone was bleeding at the wall before the body fell, that someone might have been your sister, or another. A useful ambiguity." He drew from his pocket a little coil of twine and, to my surprise, a fishing weight. With deft hands he tied the weight and swung it lightly over the wall, letting the line run through his fingers until it fell slack. Then he tugged, listening, and drew it back. "Nothing caught," said he. "No projecting thorn, no wire, no nail. Yet if a rope had been recently used here, it would leave more than a crushed bottle and a smear of blood. We are missing our method." Mr. Hargreaves looked near collapse. "Then how could she—" Holmes turned to him sharply, but not unkindly. "Mr. Hargreaves, when you left your sister at 9 o'clock, did you observe her demeanour? Anything unusual? A letter upon the hall table? A knock? A sound from the garden?" The man shook his head. "Nothing. She was as always. There was a letter, yes, one on a plain grey paper. She glanced at it and put it in her pocket when we were at the door. I thought it some school matter." Holmes's eyes glittered a fraction. "Grey paper, you say? Not her usual correspondence?" "I do not know. It was not sealed. I saw only that it was folded once." "And where had it come from?" "I assumed by the afternoon post." Holmes stood very still for a heartbeat, as if a gear within him had clicked into place. Then he turned away, his long coat catching the damp wind like a sail. "Lestrade," said he quietly, "you will do me a kindness. Bring me everything taken from that desk, especially any letters on grey paper. And you will also inquire of the railway men precisely when the first train passed this cutting after 9 o'clock on Wednesday. The minute, Inspector, not the hour. We are dealing with a timetable, and timetables do not befriend carelessness." Lestrade opened his mouth to object, thought better of it, and nodded. Holmes looked once more at the blank face of the house, at the upper window set dark against darker sky. "A window that opens to nowhere," he murmured, more to himself than to us, "is sometimes only a window, but sometimes it is a mouth. And mouths, Watson, are made for speaking truths that doors are too honest to tell." Holmes's last words still hung in my ears when we returned indoors, for there was that in his tone which suggested not poetic whim, but the close approach of some definite inference. The housekeeper led us to a small parlour at the back, where a lamp had been lit and a tray set with tea that no one touched. The room bore the modest refinement of a woman who had little time for ornament, but much taste for cleanliness. A sewing basket stood by the sofa with a child's half-finished sampler peeping from beneath a cloth. In the grate a few coals still glowed, and beside them lay the poker which had forced the door. Here, at least, the air was warmer, but the warmth only sharpened the feeling of intrusion, as though we warmed ourselves at a hearth whose owner had stepped out for an errand and would not return. Holmes paced once around the room, then stopped before the mantel, where a small clock ticked resolutely. "Mrs. Toller," said he to the stout cook who hovered in the doorway, "when you bolted the garden door last night, did you do so at your usual hour?" "Yes, sir," she answered, wiping her eye with her apron. "9:30. I always do it when I've cleared away the supper things." I give the bolt a push and a pull, same as ever. "Had anyone occasion to go out after that?" "Not as I know of. All the girls was upstairs by then. Miss Clara herself, God rest her, never went into the garden after dark. She said it set the girls to fancifying." Holmes nodded, and his gaze drifted to the stairwell. "Martha!" he called. The maid came timidly, twisting her hands so that her knuckles showed white through the chafing. "You brought the candle to your mistress at what hour?" "About 9:30, sir. She was sitting there at her desk." She pointed. "She was writing." "Did she speak to you?" "Yes, sir. She asked if the new pupil's trunk had come. I said no. She told me to put her nightgown on the chair done up, and to wake her at 7. "Did you observe anything in her manner? Was she startled? Hasty?" "No more than common. She did look at a letter while I was in the room, though. Grey it was, like Mr. Theo says." "Did she read it before you?" "Not that I seen. She had it in her hand and kind of held it a moment, like thinking. Then she put it down under the blotter when I left." Holmes's head came up. "Under the blotter?" "Yes, sir." He went at once to the desk and lifted the blotter. There was nothing beneath but a faint, clean square where paper had lain. Holmes tapped the wood with his knuckle, then looked into the empty drawer again. "Lestrade has removed the papers," said I. "So you told me," he replied. "But he removed them badly." He knelt, and with the delicacy of a surgeon, slid his penknife along the inner edge of the desk's lower panel. There was a soft click. A narrow, false bottom, no thicker than a book cover, dropped into his palm. Within it lay a single sheet folded once. "Grey paper," he said evenly. Mr. Hargreaves started forward, but Holmes held up a hand. "Not yet. First, Mrs. Toller, who had access to this desk besides your mistress?" "No one, sir. She kept it locked when she was away, and I dare say no servant would dare meddle. I wouldn't touch it for a guinea." "And the girls?" "They're not allowed in her room." "Yet there is a hidden compartment," said Holmes, turning the paper over without opening it, "which suggests your sister possessed secrets even in a house of rules. Watson, would you oblige me by reading? My eyes do not care for lamplight after midnight. There are moments when one feels a very small man in the presence of a very great one." I took the letter with a hand that I tried to keep steady and unfolded it. The writing was plain, upright, and carried a firmness that suggested a practiced male hand. "Miss Hargreaves," I read, "if you value the safety of the child entrusted to your charge, you will do precisely as instructed. You will come alone to the rear garden at 10 o'clock this evening. You will bring no lamp, make no sound, and tell no one. If you fail in any point, harm will come before dawn. You will find a way. Remember, the wall has eyes." My voice grew hoarser as I reached the end. A silence followed so complete that the ticking clock seemed suddenly loud and impertinent. Mr. Hargreaves sank into the nearest chair. "A child," he whispered. "What child? Good God, what child?" Holmes took the letter from me and held it nearer the lamp. "There is no signature," said he. No seal. The paper is cheap, the sort sold in quires from any stationer. The ink is ordinary, yet the writer is educated. Note the clarity, the absence of slang, and the choice of threat. Child entrusted to your charge, not girl in your care. It is a phrase from a man who thinks in legal or formal terms. Blackmail, said Lestrade under his breath, or coercion of another kind. Now, Mr. Hargreaves, have any of the pupils recently vanished for an hour, returned, frightened, behaved strangely? I have not the least idea. Clara spoke of mischief, nothing more. Holmes turned to Martha. You said there is a new pupil expected Monday. Name? Miss Violet Larkin.
Sir? And has her trunk arrived? No, sir. Holmes's face did not change, but I knew him well enough to see that he had fastened on the name like a terrier on a rat. Mrs. Toller, where is the register of pupils? In Miss Clara's schoolroom, sir. It's locked, but I have a key. Fetch it. She bustled away. Holmes stood by the fire with his back to us, the letter in his long fingers, his head tilted in that posture of intense reflection. When Mrs. Toller returned, she brought a thick ledger bound in green cloth, its corners rubbed by years. Holmes opened it and ran his eye down the neat columns of names and fees. Violet Larkin, he said presently. Approved in person by your sister last week. Deposited a first term's fee in advance through a Mr. Jonas Larkin, address in Bayswater. Her father? I asked. So the entry says.
Yet I should like to know why a father who has paid in advance does not send luggage on time, and more to our purpose, if Violet Larkin is expected, she is not yet entrusted. The letter speaks of a child already in charge, therefore the threat concerns a current pupil. Lestrade scratched his chin. We've 10 girls here. We checked 'em for bruises or fright. The lot of 'em was red-eyed and sobbing, but none missing. We asked if Miss Clara had troubles. They said she was kind but strict, nothing else. Holmes closed the ledger. Because you asked in a policeman's voice and expected honesty as a debt. Girls of 12 keep secrets from their mothers. They will keep them from you for sport. Watson, we must see these pupils. The housekeeper hesitated. At this hour, sir? They've only just settled. Holmes's glance was gentle, but irresistible. Madam, their mistress has been murdered. Their settling is a luxury we cannot afford. Pray wake them quietly and bring them to the schoolroom. I will not alarm them. While this was done, Holmes drew me aside. You observe how the facts fold into each other, he murmured. The chair angled at the desk, interruption by a letter, the smear on the outer sill, someone at the window from outside to in, the crushed bottle glass on the wall, contact there late at night, the railway cutting, chosen because it swallows sound and offers speed. Now we must discover the motive behind that letter and the identity of the child entrusted. Once we know that, the method will follow like a shadow. You suspect she went into the garden at 10? I suspect she tried. But a woman in a locked room does not simply walk out to a wall that has eyes. She needed a way. That way involved the window and another person. Who? Why? We stand on the threshold. The schoolroom was a long, bright chamber, even at night, with maps on the walls and a pianoforte at one end. The girls, in their dressing gowns, were gathered there in a frightened cluster, whispering and clutching one another's sleeves. Their hair was braided for sleep, their faces pale as candle wax. The eldest might have been 14. The youngest, a mite with a doll pressed to her chest, could not have been more than 8. Holmes stepped forward with that air of calm authority which children recognize instinctively. "Ladies," said he, with a little bow that made them stare despite their sorrow, "I am a friend of your dear Miss Hargreaves. I wish to find the wicked person who has harmed her. To do so I must ask you a few small questions. You will help me, for her sake, will you not?" A murmur ran through them, half sob, half assent. One girl, taller than the rest and with a sharp, intelligent face, seemed to gather herself like a soldier. "Yes, sir," said she. Holmes's eyes rested on her. "Your name?" "Agnes Weller." He nodded as if he had expected it. "Miss Weller, you are not afraid to speak plainly. Good. Tell me, Did Miss Hargreaves receive any visitors in the last week besides parents and tradesmen? Agnes bit her lip. I saw her glance quickly at the others, then back at Holmes. "There was a man, sir," she said at last in a low voice. "He came to the garden gate on Tuesday after lessons. Miss Clara went out to speak with him. She told us to stay indoors. What sort of man? Tall, wore a dark coat and a hat pulled low. I couldn't see his face. Did you hear anything he said?" "No, sir, but when she came back she looked as if she'd seen a ghost." Holmes inclined his head. "Excellent. And did you speak of this to the police?" Agnes cast her eyes down. "Inspector Lestrade asked us if anyone had been naughty. I didn't know if it mattered." Lestrade flushed deeper than the firelight could excuse, but Holmes did not look at him. "Anything else unusual? Any letter passed to one of you? Anyone watching the school from the lane? Any stranger who spoke to you?" At this, the small girl with the doll began to tremble. She pressed her face into another's shoulder. Holmes noticed at once and stooped so his eyes were level with hers. "You are not in trouble?" "My dear," said he softly, "but you may help your teacher. What is your name?" "Elsie," she whispered, barely audible. "Elsie, did someone speak to you?" Tears rolled down her cheeks. She nodded. "Where?" asked Holmes. "In the garden, after supper, last night." Her voice shook like a leaf. "I went to fetch my hoop from the grass because I'd left it, and I heard a man by the wall. He said, 'Little Elsie, come here.' I was frightened. I ran. I didn't tell because Miss Clara would scold me for going out." A sharp intake of breath went through the room. Mr. Hargreaves half rose, his face white with fury. "A man spoke to you in the garden?" Holmes repeated, very quiet now. "Yes, sir," she sobbed. "He said he knew my mamma, but I don't have a mamma." Holmes straightened slowly. I saw his mind moving with that swift, invisible precision which always preceded action. "Watson," said he under his breath, "the wall has eyes indeed, and a voice. We are nearer." Holmes dismissed the girls with a few gentle phrases, and the housekeeper led them away in a rustle of flannel and frightened whispers. Elsie was the last to go, still weeping into her doll's hair. When the door closed behind them, the room seemed suddenly very large and empty, like a theatre after the actors have fled. Mr. Hargreaves stood by the desk, knuckles white upon its edge, his grief now edged with a raw, helpless rage. Lestrade, ill at ease in the presence of women's sorrow and children's secrets, busied himself with striking his gloves together as though he might beat a solution out of them. Holmes remained motionless for some seconds, his gaze on the spot where Elsie had stood. "A child with no mother," said he at length. "Mark that phrase. It was not a simple confession, it was an opening." "You mean she's an orphan?" I asked. "Perhaps, or perhaps she believes herself to be. School children are not always informed of the finer points of their lineage." The man by the wall chose his words carefully. "I knew your mamma. If true, it suggests acquaintance with her family. If false, it was a lure meant to hook her curiosity. Either way, he addressed her by name, and so had watched her close enough to learn it." Lestrade shifted. "We can put a man on the wall at once. If he shows his face again—" "He will not show his face to a policeman. He will show it to a child or to a woman frightened for a child. That is the difference between your trap and mine." Holmes turned to Mr. Hargreaves.
"You say Elsie has no mother. Do you know her history?" Mr. Hargreaves shook his head. "Clara took her in 2 years ago. A charitable case. I remember my sister saying the child had been placed with her by a clergyman friend. She never spoke much of it except that the girl had had a hard beginning." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "A clergyman friend in Hampstead?" "I believe so. Reverend Berkeley of St. Luke's. He wrote to Clara about several poor children." "Then Reverend Berkeley shall be among our witnesses." Holmes took a pencil from the desk and made a note on the inside cover of the ledger as calmly as if he were arranging a dinner party. Now there is another point. Elsie went into the garden after supper, despite rules. Therefore, the garden door was not yet bolted at that time. You, Mrs. Toller, said you bolted it at 9:30.
When did the girls have supper? At 7, sir. Then prayers at 8, then they go to their rooms. But the older ones is allowed a little free time before bed. Free time in the garden? Sometimes, if it's fine. Yesterday it was damp, so they was mostly in. But Elsie's a little one. She might slip out without asking. Quite. Holmes ran his long fingers across the map of England on the wall, not looking at it, but thinking. The man was by the wall after supper. That places him between 7 and 9:30. Yet the letter commanded your sister to meet him at 10. Therefore he was already on the premises before the appointed hour. Why? To make sure she came, I suggested. To make sure he could get in, said Holmes. A man who threatens must control his stage. If he intended to receive Miss Hargreaves in the garden at 10, he would need concealment and a reliable path of retreat. The railway cutting provides both, yet the wall blocks access, and despite the crushed glass and the blood, there is no evidence of a rope. So how did he communicate and how did he cross? Lestrade spread his hands. If he didn't cross, then it's all moonshine. Holmes looked at him with gentle contempt. You saw no rope because you looked for a rope. A child saw a voice because she listened for a voice. I prefer the child's evidence. He moved toward the pianoforte. The instrument's lid was closed, and upon it lay a metronome and a book of hymns. Holmes lifted the lid and peered within the strings. He plucked one softly, then another, listening to their notes die in the quiet room. Sound, he murmured, more to himself than to us. Soft walls, soft hearts, and outside, the railway for thunder, a perfect cover for a whisper. What are you at, Holmes? Lestrade demanded, half irritated, half anxious. I am at the place where a shy criminal would hide his breath. Holmes crossed to the window of the schoolroom and opened it an inch. Cool air slid in. He leaned out and looked along the back of the house. Watson, come. I joined him. Below us was the strip of path we had walked, and beyond it, the garden. The wall lay further back, and from this angle I could see a narrow shed, roofed with slate, tucked into the corner, used perhaps for tools. Observe that shed, said Holmes. Its eaves nearly touch the wall. A nimble man could climb upon it from the garden side and look over, but there is bottle glass on the wall. It is not an easy perch. And yet the glass is crushed at one point, I said, catching his drift. Exactly, someone did perch there and bled. Mr. Hargreaves, who had followed, stared out with me. But that still leaves the question, how could Clara reach him? She could not climb to the shed, certainly not at night. Holmes's face was grave as a judge's. She could not climb, therefore she did not climb. She went to the garden because of Elsie. The man called her over the wall at 10. She approached. He showed her something, perhaps a small parcel, perhaps a note, perhaps even the child's ribbon or toy, to prove his access or his threat. At that moment, she was lured closer. The man's purpose was not to speak longer than needed. It was to induce her to do something immediate. What thing? Lestrade asked, in spite of himself. To open a way. Holmes closed the schoolroom window and paced back to the desk. He tapped the surface lightly. Your sister would not leave the girls unprotected at night unless compelled. The letter compelled her. But if she went to the garden at 10, why did she not return? And why is her room locked from within and her bed untouched? We must align those facts, so let us reconstruct her last hour. He held up a hand, counting on thin fingers. 9 o'clock. Mr. Hargreaves leaves. 9:30. Martha brings a candle, sees her writing and handling the grey letter. After Martha leaves, Miss Hargreaves hides the letter, implying secrecy. She continues writing perhaps a few minutes. At some point she rises suddenly. The angled chair tells us so. She has been interrupted. That interruption likely came from outside because the next confirmed event is her attempt to meet the man in the garden. Therefore there was a signal, a tap at the window, a whisper, a thrown pebble. The man already on the premises could manage any of these. He turned slightly so we could see his face in profile. His eyes were half-lidded, but alive. She dresses quickly. Note the nightgown folded on the chair, untouched, as if she did not put it on. She may already have been in her day dress, intending only a short conference. She takes no lamp, because instructed. She leaves her room and locking it behind her. No, the locked door from within forbids that. Therefore she must have left by an alternate exit, one that allowed the door to be locked afterward from inside. Lestrade opened his mouth, then closed it. A faint colour crept into his cheeks. You can't mean... I mean that someone else locked it, someone inside the room after she had gone. How to get inside? Through the window. A hand from outside to inside brushed the sill. There is your smear. The man who bled on the wall climbed to her window from outside, entered her room, and locked it after she had left. Why lock it? To create the illusion she never occupied it, to buy time, to bewilder you, and to delay discovery until after dawn. But there's no way to the window from outside, Lestrade protested, repeating his refrain. Holmes flicked his eyes toward him. We have not yet searched the exterior by daylight. We have assumed nothing. Assumption is a drug, Inspector. It numbs the mind. Still, I felt the force of Lestrade's objection. The back of the house rose sheer from the ground. There were no drain pipes within reach of the second floor, no thick trees, no trellis. Yet Holmes spoke with such certainty that the impossibility began to look like my own failure of imagination. And after he locked the room? Mr. Hargreaves asked, in a hoarse whisper. After he locked it, he went to the garden meeting he had arranged. Miss Hargreaves was already there, perhaps with Elsie in her arms, perhaps without her, but thinking of her. The man needed to move her to the wall and over it. He might have told her the child was beyond, or that someone waited there, but he could not haul her over without a rope, and there is no rope. So he made use of what the railway provides, timing and noise. Holmes went to the clock. A train passing below masks any cry. A train arriving gives a criminal a moving screen. He brings her to the top of the wall, perhaps to show her something beyond, perhaps because she climbed the shed or a stool he placed. He is above her, on the shed roof, the crushed glass under his hands. He grabs. She resists, blood on the wall, his or hers. Then, in the instant when a train roars through, he forces her over. She falls into the cutting, and he escapes along the footpath while the house sleeps, leaving behind a locked room and an empty bed. Silence settled again. The cook crossed herself. Mr. Hargreaves stared at the floor as if he wished it would swallow him instead. "And the child?" I asked softly. Holmes's gaze returned to Elsie's vanished place. "That, Watson, is the heart. He threatened the safety of the child entrusted. He singled out Elsie by name. He lingered early to speak to her. There is no accident in that. Either Elsie is his true object, and your sister died because she stood between him and her, or Elsie is bait in a deeper snare." Lestrade recovered enough to scowl. "So who is he?" Holmes smiled thinly. "We have a tall man in a dark coat, educated, bold enough to haunt a girls' school, and clever enough to stage a locked-room deception. He has knowledge of Elsie's past, or wishes her to believe he does, and he has an interest strong enough to kill. We shall find him where such men gather, at the intersection of schooling, charity, and inheritance." He took his hat from the desk's corner and donned it with sudden decision. "Watson, we return to Baker Street. At first light, we visit Reverend Barclay and Mr. Jonas Larkin of Bayswater. Before the day is out, I mean to learn why a small school in Hampstead has become the theatre for a murder that depends on a child's unknown history." As we left the schoolroom, I glanced back once at the neat desks and the silent pianoforte. It seemed to me then that the room held a faint echo of voices, lessons recited, hymns sung, Clara Hargreaves's firm, gentle counsel, and that somewhere within that echo was concealed the key to her death. Holmes, walking ahead through the hallway's dimness, had already become once more a figure of swift, intent purpose, and I knew from the set of his shoulders that the case, far from reaching its end, had only begun to open, like that dreadful window, upon a darkness that promised depth without measure. We reached Baker Street in the grey of early morning, and though the city still slept under a thin, dirty veil of fog, Holmes was as alert as if noon bells had been ringing. He had said little on the drive back, but the very stillness of him was eloquent. It was the stillness of a hound straining at the leash. Once within our rooms, he threw off his coat, raked the embers into a blaze, and stood with his back to it while I made coffee in the adjoining chamber. When I returned, he had the Hampstead Ledger open before him, and his long fingers were moving in a silent rhythm upon the table. "You will observe, Watson," said he without preamble, "that when a criminal takes pains to bewilder, it is because he cannot prevent discovery forever. The locked door and the open window were not to bar pursuit, but to delay it. Delay buys trains, letters, lawyers, and the changing of names." "You mean to say he is already flying?" "I mean to say he has planned to fly from the first. Such men do not improvise their exits. Now let us list our fixed points. 1. The man by the wall knows Elsie. 2. He compelled Clara Hargreaves to meet him. 3. He arranged the scene to suggest an impossible departure. 4. He chose the railway cutting because he wanted sound, speed, and shadow. 5. He is educated, or at least writes as one who has lived among educated people. From these, certain lines radiate. He pulled a sheet of paper toward him and wrote a name at the top. Reverend Berkeley, charity breeds two species of man, the genuine benefactor and the wolf in a clerical coat. Until we speak to Berkeley, we do not know which he is. Next, Jonas Larkin. You will note the coincidence of names. Violet Larkin expected, Jonas Larkin paying. Expected on Monday, a letter compelling a meeting on Wednesday. There is a rhythm there. Perhaps the Larkins are innocent, perhaps not, but they are close enough to taste. A rap came at the door, and Mrs. Hudson ushered in a telegraph boy with a yellow envelope. Holmes tore it open with a quickness that made the boy blink. "From Lestrade," said he. "Ah, good. He can be competent when frightened." He handed it to me. It read, "First train after 9 past, cutting 9:17. Next 9:43, freight 10:06. Person at signal box reports. Unusual stop 10:07 approx 1 minute. No further notes." I looked up. Holmes's eyes were bright. 9:17, 9:43, freight 10:06, he repeated softly, and a stop at 10:07, exactly when a man might need a monstrous exclamation to cover a mortal act. The stop is curious. An accident, or a signal pulled, or a body seen, or a man in the cutting who had no business there. You see how every fact is a doorway. We will visit the signal box presently, but first, Berkeley. We took a hansom at 8 and drove again toward Hampstead, this time in daylight. The change was astonishing. The fog had thinned into a faint silver film. The trees along the heath were already turning, and children in blue serge were hurrying with satchels as though the world contained no murders at all. St. Luke's stood on a rise, a plain brick church with a small spire and a graveyard crowded tight, the stones leaning like old teeth. We found Reverend Berkeley in his vestry, a middle-aged man with mild eyes and a mouth that had learned to smile in consolations. His hands were ink-stained, and his collar slightly frayed, the honest badges of a busy parish. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," said he, for Lestrade had evidently sent word. "This is a dreadful matter. Poor Miss Hargreaves and those girls. It seems the devil has walked in our borough." "The devil seldom walks without leaving the prints of a man," Holmes returned. "Reverend, you placed Elsie in Miss Hargreaves's care. I must know on what authority." Berkeley's brow furrowed with grief and puzzlement. "Elsie Hatherley," said he. "Yes, a special case. She was brought to me by a woman in deep distress, Mrs. Hatherley, 2 years ago. She begged for shelter for her child's sake, and I arranged temporary lodging with a parish widow. Within a fortnight, The mother died of fever. The child had no other relations that we could trace. I appealed to Miss Hargreaves, who was ever charitable. She took the girl as a boarder, without fee. You are certain the mother's name was Hatherley? Holmes asked. As certain as I can be. I wrote it in my charity register. May I see that register? The Reverend hesitated only long enough to show that he had nothing to hide, then unlocked a cabinet. He produced a small book and laid it open. Holmes's eye ran down the entries, and he stopped at one in a neat clerical hand. Elsie Hatherley, received with mother, Mrs. Sarah Hatherley, lodged at Mrs. Price's. Mother deceased November 1287, child placed with Miss Clara Hargreaves. Holmes traced the line with a fingertip. Who signed the burial certificate for Mrs. Hatherley? I did. With the doctor, it was a plain parish burial. Any effects, letters, a trunk, anything that might indicate family? Very little. She had no ring, a small locket, which I believe Elsie still wears. Some clothing, a Bible, and a purse with a few shillings. She was reticent about her past. I could not press her when she was so ill. Holmes closed the book. Reverend, did any man inquire after Elsie in the last 2 years? Berkeley's eyes widened. Only once. About 8 months ago a gentleman came to the parish office asking if I knew a child named Elsie. He claimed to be from a charitable society. He was well-spoken and carried a card. I told him, of course, that Elsie was placed and happy, and that I could not give addresses without cause. He thanked me politely and left. I thought no more of it. Describe him. The Reverend stared at the ceiling, summoning memory. Tall, certainly, dark hair, a slight moustache. Dressed as a professional man, perhaps a solicitor. His manner was restrained. He did not look like a scoundrel. Most scoundrels do not, said Holmes. And the card? I regret I did not keep it. It bore the name St. Bride's Children's Aid Society, or something similar. There are so many. Holmes's head tilted. St. Bride's, he murmured. In Fleet Street. There is indeed a society by that name, though not all who speak its title are members. Reverend, I may trouble you for the name of the doctor who attended Mrs. Hatherley? Dr. Reeves of Pond Street. Thank you. One more question. Did Mrs. Hatherley ever speak of the child's father? Berkeley's face softened. She said once only, as in a wandering hour, that he would take her if he found her. I assumed she meant some brutish husband. She begged me to keep the child safe. Holmes inclined his head gravely. You did your duty, Reverend. The danger lay not in your trust but in the world's cunning. Outside, Holmes drew a deep breath of cold air, as if the church walls had stifled him. Watson, you perceive the outline? He said as we walked down the path between graves. A mother in hiding, a child placed in secrecy, a well-spoken gentleman seeking her under a false society, and now a threat that she will be harmed before dawn if a woman does not comply. That is not the pattern of random vice, it is the pattern of possession. Possession of a child, or of what a child represents. The mother feared he would take her. She died. The fear remained. He has found the child at last. Everything turns on why. We hailed another cab at Holmes's signal. To Bayswater, said he. We shall learn what business the Larkins have with Hampstead, unless they are only another mask worn by our tall gentleman, and after that the signal box. One step at a time, Watson. No leaps, only ladders. As we drove away, I looked back at St. Luke's, shrinking behind us. The morning sun had broken through, laying clean light across the churchyard. Yet the case, instead of brightening, seemed to me to deepen. For I felt now that we were not dealing merely with a murder, but with some long-buried thread of human history that had been tugged too hard and had snapped in blood. Holmes, gazing out with narrowed eyes, appeared to feel the same. He was silent, but the silence was no longer patient. It was sharpened to a point. Our cab set us down in a quiet Bayswater street of pale stucco and clipped shrubs, the sort of neighbourhood where the houses seemed to doze behind their railings. secure in the idea that respectability is proof against misfortune. Holmes walked a little ahead, his eyes roaming over area walls, fanlights, tradesmen's bells, and all those mute details from which he drew a richer narrative than any newspaper. We halted before a door bearing a brass plate. Mr. Jonas Larkin, solicitor. The coincidence of profession with Reverend Berkeley's memory did not escape me, and I saw a faint tightening at the corner of Holmes's mouth. A clerk answered, surprised at such callers before noon, and in a moment we were shown into a book-lined office smelling of dust, leather, and sealing wax. Mr. Jonas Larkin rose from his desk. He was a man of perhaps 50, with iron-grey hair, a precise parting, and the chilly politeness of one who has learned to treat emotion as a disorder to be handled with gloves. His clothes were well brushed, his cuffs immaculate, but his eyes, though steady, had that guarded look common to men who manage other people's secrets for a living. "Mr. Holmes," said he, "Inspector Lestrade sent a note that you might call. A most distressing affair at Miss Hargreaves's school. Pray be seated." Holmes declined the chair by remaining standing. "I need only a few minutes if they are answered plainly," said he. "You have paid a term's fee in advance for a pupil named Violet Larkin." The solicitor blinked once, quickly. "I have? Your daughter? My niece. Then, Mr. Larkin, you will forgive my directness. Why is your niece destined for that school in Hampstead?" Mr. Larkin's thin lips tightened. "The child has been left to my guardianship. I have responsibilities which prevent my constant attendance. Miss Hargreaves was recommended as a woman of character." "By whom?" "By Reverend Berkeley." He spoke the name with a faint air of relief, as if it placed the matter on a proper moral footing. "Reverend Berkeley recommended her 2 years ago for Elsie Hatherley," Holmes returned. "Did he also recommend her for your niece last week?" "Yes. I wrote to him asking for a respectable establishment that would take a girl at short notice." "Short notice?" Holmes's voice was soft. "You had not considered schooling earlier?" "My brother's death was sudden," Mr. Larkin said sharply. "I did what I could." "Your brother was Violet's father?" "He was. Arthur Larkin." "Where did he die?" "In Australia. At sea on his return." Mr. Larkin clasped his hands behind his back. "Mr. Holmes, I am sure you recognize the unpleasantness of probing a family bereavement." Holmes bowed slightly. "I probe only where facts lead, Mr. Larkin. There is a bereavement of another kind with which you are indirectly concerned. Miss Hargreaves is dead. A letter on grey paper compelled her to meet a man in her garden at 10 o'clock on Wednesday. I should like to know whether you sent any such letter." The solicitor's face stiffened into astonishment that I judged to be genuine. "Certainly not. What extraordinary idea!" "It is extraordinary only if untrue," said Holmes. "You are a solicitor. Grey paper is the kind you might use. The letter's language is formal. You paid in advance, which suggests urgency. Therefore, I ask." Mr. Larkin drew a breath through his nose, controlling himself. "No, sir. I wrote Miss Hargreaves once by afternoon post on Tuesday. The paper was cream. I have a copy. The letter merely confirmed the fee and asked whether Violet might arrive Monday. Nothing else." "May I see it?" "A moment." He went to a cabinet, unlocked it, and returned with a fold of thin paper. Holmes read it, and I, looking over his shoulder, saw that it was indeed commonplace. Holmes studied the signature, the hand, even the faint indentation left by the pen, then handed it back with a nod. "Thank you. One more matter. Do you know a society called St. Bride's Children's Aid?" Mr. Larkin's eyes narrowed. "I know of it. It is reputable." "Why? Have you any connection with it? Membership, donations, legal business?" "No, none." "Then do you know any man who might trade on its name to gain access to a child?" Mr. Larkin stared coldly. "If you imply that I imply nothing of you," Holmes interrupted. "Only that a tall, well-spoken man asked Reverend Berkeley about Elsie Hatherley 8 months ago under that pretext. Elsie is now threatened. Miss Hargreaves is dead. It is useful to know if the impostor resembles anyone in your circle." The solicitor's expression softened not at all, but the defensive edge slipped, giving way to a professional curiosity. "A tall, well-spoken man could be half London," said he, "but if such a fellow uses charity as a mask, he is either desperate or practised. Have you any reason to believe this touches me?" Holmes considered him for a second longer than politeness required. "Not yet. You may be only an innocent spoke in the wheel. But wheels, Mr. Larkin, grind whether the spokes intend it or not." He took up his hat. "Should any new knowledge occur to you, you will send word to me at once." We were shown out. The street seemed unchanged, but to me the air had grown tenser, as if some invisible wire now ran between Bayswater and Hampstead. "Well?" I asked, once we were beyond earshot. Holmes's expression was unreadable. "Jonas Larkin is not our writer. His hand differs, his ink differs, and his shock was not staged, but his niece is not irrelevant. Notice the timing. A child arrives Monday, a threat made Wednesday, a murder to prevent Wednesday's failure. The villain has a schedule. Schedules revolve around arrivals. A new child coming to the school would unsettle old arrangements. Why send Violet there? Why at short notice? Either Larkin truly is selecting a school near some private interest, or he is being guided, perhaps deceived, by another. By the tall man? Possibly, but I do not yet see Larkin as puppet or player. We require the missing strand, the mother's true identity. He hailed a passing cab. "To Pond Street, then. We shall see Dr. Reeves." Dr. Reeves proved a ruddy, bustling general practitioner with a waiting room full of coughing infants and exhausted mothers. He remembered Sarah Hatherley at once. Yes, a fever case. Poor woman. Came to the parish in a dreadful state. Thin as a shadow, the child clung to her skirts like a burr. She wouldn't give her name at first, said she'd been robbed. I saw her twice before she went to Berkeley's lodging. Then I was called in when the fever turned. "Did she speak in delirium?" Holmes asked. "Certainly, most fever patients do." Reeves wiped his brow, half apologetic. "She raved about a man. Said he'd find the child and drag her away. Said something about the window too, come to think of it. I took it for the mind's jumble. At such times, Doctor, you know how the thoughts wander." Holmes's head came up a fraction. "The window?" Reeves shrugged. "She said don't let him open it, or he opened it once. I can't be exact. Fever talk." Holmes was very still. "Did she mention any name, any place, any detail that lodged with you?" "She called him Edward once." "Or Edwin. And she spoke of the papers, and the little one's right. I thought she was wandering among family matters." Holmes leaned forward. "Her accent, her manner. Was she of the parish class?" Reeves considered. "No, she spoke like a lady trying to sound plain. Her hands were soft. She had once been better off. That's why I presumed some domestic tragedy." Holmes thanked him and took his leave. When we were outside again, he walked a dozen paces without speaking, then stopped so suddenly that I nearly collided with him. "Watson," said he, "the word right is the pivot. The mother feared abduction, not murder. She was hiding the child's right to something, name, money, title. She died before she could secure it. The pursuer is now close enough to kill. Therefore the right must be valuable enough to justify risk." "That points toward inheritance," I said. "Precisely. And inheritance implies a death, a will, and a claimant. Sarah Hatherley was not her true name. A lady in hiding chooses a common alias. We must discover what death 2 years ago created a valuable claim for a female child, now 8 years old." As he spoke, the yellow fog had thickened again, drifting down from the north. Through it I saw Lestrade's familiar figure approaching at a trot, his coat flapping. "Holmes, I've been at that signal box you asked about. The operator says a freight train stopped because someone pulled the emergency cord from inside the rear carriage. They sent a man down to look. He found nothing but, well, this." He thrust out a small object wrapped in paper. Holmes unrolled it carefully. It was a child's locket on a thin chain, dented on one side and smeared faintly with rust. Reverend Barclay's words returned to me. Elsie wore a locket. Found in the cutting? Holmes asked. Aye, near where the body lay, but a little further down. The signalman thinks it fell from the train window when they stopped, but it could have been there before. We didn't search every inch last night. Holmes turned the locket over in his fingers. A tiny hinge gaped where it had been forced. It has been opened roughly, said he. Lestrade whistled low. So the man took it off the lass? Then why chuck it? To see what was inside, Holmes replied. He held it toward the weak light. Nothing now, but a locket holds hair, a portrait, a scrap of paper, a token of identity. Our tall gentleman opened it because he suspected identity lay there. He threw it because it disappointed, or because he had already learned what he needed. Mr. Hargreaves's name had not been mentioned in this exchange, yet suddenly his earlier despair seemed to hover again in my mind. A woman murdered for a child with a hidden right, a locket forced open in the cutting. The pieces began to take a shape that chilled me. Holmes slipped the locket into his pocket as if it were a coin. Lestrade, said he, you will return to the school at once and keep Elsie under watch, but not in a manner she will notice. No uniform in the garden, no heavy footsteps. If our man has not secured his prize, he will try again. We mean to be there when he does. He looked toward me, his eyes suddenly alive with that fierce joy of pursuit, which was the dark twin of his genius. Watson, to Baker Street. We must consult the death notices and probate records of November 87. Somewhere in those dry columns lies the name Sarah Hatherley tried to bury. When we have it, the window that opened to nowhere will open to a very definite place indeed. We were again in our familiar sitting room before the afternoon had gathered itself, and though the comfort of the place usually had a soothing effect upon me, I confess that on this occasion it served only to sharpen my impatience. Holmes, however, moved with the unhurried certainty of a man who knows that the quarry is already within the net. He had sent a message to a clerk of his acquaintance in Chancery Lane, requesting whatever probate lists and death notices could be procured for the month of November 1887, and while we waited he had covered the table with newspapers, almanacs, keys, and a small stack of the London Gazette. You will find, said he, settling himself cross-legged upon the sofa, that the past is not dead, it is only filed, and filing, when done by government, is the surest method of eternal preservation. He spoke lightly, but his eyes never ceased from their swift work. I took up a paper at random and began scanning the columns, but my own efforts were clumsy beside his. He did not read as I read. He skimmed, leaped, returned, and pounced with the precision of a man searching not for general intelligibility, but for a single grain of gold. Here is one avenue, he remarked, tapping a list with his pencil. Deaths of persons of means. The mother was a lady, therefore her husband, or the man she feared, was likely a gentleman. A gentleman leaves a trace. If he died in 87, his estate would be proved within months, and his heir would have a name. The bell rang. Mrs. Hudson admitted a thin, eager young man with ink on his cuffs and the air of one who had run all the way from the Strand. Mr. Holmes, sir, as requested. Probate records and notices for November and December 87, and any wills of interest. I brought the Gazette copies in case. Holmes took the packet, thanked him, and dismissed him with a shilling. He slit the string, spread the documents, and fell to work with renewed energy. The afternoon light slanted across the papers, and the air grew thick with the rustle of turning pages. For perhaps half an hour, nothing broke the steady rhythm. Then Holmes gave a low "ah" and sat upright. Listen, Watson. November 10th, 1887, death of Sir Julian Ashcombe, Baronet of Ashcombe Hall, Surrey. Cause apoplexy. Widow Lady Ashcombe, née Sarah Hartwell. One surviving child, a daughter, reported deceased in infancy. He looked up sharply. Sarah. Lady, a daughter, reported deceased. Does that not ring like a bell struck in fog? I felt my pulse quicken. If Lady Ashcombe's child were not dead, then she would be the heir to the baronetcy's estates, if the entail allows a female line, or at the very least to a considerable portion. And if she were hidden, the next male branch would step in. Who did step in? He turned another sheet. The will was proved January 88. Heirs. In default of issue, the estate passes to Sir Julian's nephew, Edward Ashcombe. Edward! I cried. The fevered mother's word. Holmes's thin smile was like the flash of a knife. Exactly. Edward Ashcombe. The man Sarah feared. The man who comes for the child's right. If Sarah Hartwell became Lady Ashcombe and then fled with her infant, she would take with her the only claimant who could bar Edward's advance. She hid under Hatherley. She sought Berkeley. She died. Edward waited, searched, and now has found the child at last. That child is Elsie. The conclusion fell upon me with the force of inevitability, and yet it chilled me to see so monstrous a motive laid bare so quickly as one might uncover a corpse with the pull of a sheet. But why the school? I asked. Why not simply take her? Why threaten Clara? Because Miss Hargreaves was the lock upon the last door, said he. An honest woman does not surrender a child to a stranger without proof. Edward possessed neither legal proof nor moral right. He tried once under a false charity card and failed. Now he resorts to terror. He writes to Clara, compels a midnight meeting, and uses the child herself as bait, which brings us to the method we still lack, how he entered that second-floor room. I began to speak, but a sharp knock at the door interrupted me. It was Lestrade, without ceremony, hat in hand and face tight. "He's there," he blurted, "or someone is, at the school. My men saw a fellow in a soft hat walking by the wall at dusk. He slipped off toward the heath when they moved. We've kept to your orders, quiet as mice, but I think it's tonight or never." Holmes was already on his feet, and the quickness of his movement was itself an answer. "Good," said he. "You have done well to keep him from scenting the trap. Now we shall shift the scene to where he believes himself master. Lestrade, you will return ahead and place one man only, plain-clothed, in the shed corner by the wall. Another you will hide by the garden door, inside. No more. The fewer eyes, the less glare. I will be there within the hour." Lestrade blinked. "Within the hour? It's nearly 6. Exactly when a man who watches walls begins to feel hungry for his prize. He turned to me. "Watson, you will come. I may need your arm and perhaps your revolver. This man is not a hysterical thief. He is cool enough to murder a woman without losing a syllable of his handwriting. Such men, when cornered, turn savage." We took a cab at once, but instead of driving directly to Hampstead, Holmes had the driver stop in a narrow street near Camden Town. We descended and walked a short way to a low, grimy shop, whose window displayed coils of rope, lanterns, and the diverse apparatus of rivermen and climbers. Holmes entered, spoke a few words to the proprietor, and came out with a small bundle under his arm. "A prudent precaution," said he in response to my questioning look. "If Edward Ashcombe has found a path to that window, I mean to know it. The path may be waiting for us like a snake in a hedge." The dusk had thickened by the time we reached the school. The house loomed quiet, but there was a nervous undercurrent in the air, as if every pane listened. The girls had been kept indoors, I learned, and Elsie was with the housekeeper in the back parlour, unaware of the danger that circled her like a hawk. Holmes wasted no time. He went straight to the garden, taking me with him along the strip of path beneath the windows. The wall at the far end was already a darker line against the deepening sky. The little shed crouched in its corner. Holmes examined it closely by the fading light, then took from his bundle a compact grapnel and a coil of new rope. "Stand back a little," he said quietly, and swung the grapnel up onto the shed roof. With the ease of a sailor he climbed upon the slates, testing them for sound, and then, to my astonishment, stepped across to the wall. He crouched along its top, moving to the crushed place we had seen. His hand groped among the mortar and glass. "A foothold," he murmured. "And here, a notch freshly cut in the brick. Someone has been here more than once and has prepared for a climb." He leaned over, peering down the outer side. "We shall see what the nowhere truly is." He cast his rope over, fixed the grapnel to the wall's inner lip, and then, in a fluid motion that made my heart lurch for fear he might slip on the glass, lowered himself down the outer face. I craned over. For a moment I could see only his hands and the top of his head. Then his voice floated up, calm as if from the floor of our sitting room. "Watson, come to the corner by the shed. There is a surprise." I hurried round to where the wall met a thick tangle of ivy. Holmes had found, half hidden by the leaves, an iron ladder bolted to the outer brickwork, its rungs dark with age, but with the upper ones scuffed fresh by recent use. The ladder rose from the railway footpath, passed up behind the ivy, and ended a few feet below the coping. "The nowhere," said Holmes, eyes alight, "is a somewhere after all. The railway maintenance men must have placed this years ago for wall repairs, forgotten by most, remembered by one man with time to watch. From this ladder he could climb to the coping, step to the shed roof, and from there reach the second floor." Then he entered the window. "Exactly." He opened it, dropped into the room, waited, and afterward locked the door from inside. The method is as neat as it is vile. And now, unless I mistake him, he will attempt the same path to reach Elsie tonight. He believes the house is confused, the police clumsy, the adults frightened. He underestimates only one thing. "What is that?" "Me," said Holmes with a thin, satisfied breath. We moved back into the darkness of the garden. Lestrade had already placed his minimal men as ordered. There was no stir at the windows. The air smelled of damp earth and cold iron from the railway below. Somewhere in the distance a dog barked once and fell silent. Holmes drew me into the shadow beside the shed. "We shall let him mount the ladder," he whispered. "Let him believe the path clear. He must come close enough that retreat is cut off. When he is on the coping, I will take him from above while Lestrade closes the footpath below. If he jumps into the garden, you and I will catch him. If he tries the window again, I will be at his heels." We waited. Time in such hours stretches into a thing almost physical. I heard my own breathing, the faint creak of leaves, the distant rumble of a cart on the lane. Fate moved somewhere near, slow and deliberate. At last a sound came, soft metal on metal, a cautious tread upon rungs.
A shadow rose against the ivy like a stain spreading upward. It paused, listened, then climbed again. Holmes's hand tightened on my sleeve like a warning chain. "There," he breathed. "Let him come. Just one rung more." The shadow reached the coping. A hand, pale in the dusk, gripped the brick. Another followed. The man's head lifted above the wall, hat low, shoulders hunched. For an instant he was poised between worlds, the cutting behind, the garden before, and above him the black square of the second-floor window. And in that instant Holmes sprang. Holmes's spring was the movement of a panther, silent, certain, and so sudden that I had scarcely time to draw breath before his hands had clamped upon the intruder's collar. The man gave a short, strangled cry, more of surprise than terror.
And for an instant the two figures teetered upon the coping, outlined against the faint light from the cutting like a grotesque frieze. Then Holmes, with that wiry strength which so belies his spare frame, dragged him inward, and both dropped heavily upon the shed roof. There came at once a sharp scrape of boots and a flurry of slate. I sprang forward, scrambling up the shed's side with the desperate haste of one who fears to arrive too late. As I gained the edge, I saw Holmes astride the man, one knee pinning his chest, one hand gripping the throat of his coat. The fellow fought with a savage, compact fury, twisting like an eel. He was indeed tall, and his dark hat had fallen back to show a narrow, intelligent face with a clipped moustache and eyes that glittered with the coldest hatred I have ever witnessed. "Mr. Edward Ashcombe," said Holmes, breathless but steady. You climb walls as neatly as you pull at legal cords, but you are not so dexterous when the cord slips the other way." At the name, the man's lips peeled back from his teeth. "You damn meddler," he spat. "Let me go." "Not tonight," Holmes replied. "Watson, your hand, if you would." I hauled myself fully onto the roof. The bricks under my palms were slick with damp, and the drop beyond made my stomach tighten, but the necessity of the moment drove all else away. Ashcombe's right hand had slid toward his pocket. I caught his wrist. The man lashed out with his left, and his knuckles grazed my cheek, but I bore down with all the vigor my old campaigns had not stolen from me. Holmes, in the same breath, twisted the arm at a brutal angle. There was a crack, like a snapped twig, and a muffled scream. "Enough," said Holmes. "You will not use that hand for mischief for some little time." From below came Lestrade's voice, harsh and triumphing. "We got the footpath. He's boxed now." Ashcombe heard it, and his eyes flicked toward the outer darkness. For a heartbeat I thought he would hurl himself over the garden side rather than submit, but Holmes read the impulse and shifted his weight so that the man's back was against the slates and his legs pinned. "You are cornered," he said quietly. "Do not add injury to your ruin." Ashcombe's chest heaved. His face, now close to mine in the half-light, was streaked with brick dust and sweat, and the hatred in it was almost beautiful in its concentration. "You think this ends at a wall," he snarled.
"You don't know what you've stepped into." "I have stepped into it so far that your footprints are on my boots," Holmes returned. "Now rise. We shall go below like civilized men." We half dragged, half marched him down into the garden. Two plain-clothed men emerged from the shadows at Lestrade's summons, and between them they seized Ashcombe's unbroken arm. His coat was torn, his hat crushed in my hand, but he held himself with the rigid hauteur of a man who has lived too long among titles to lose them, even when the law wraps him like a net. Holmes did not take him to the front hall, nor to any public room. Instead, he led us to Miss Hargreaves's chamber, now lit by a single lamp which threw a bleak yellow light upon its neatness. The broken lock gaped like a wound. Ashcombe looked about him with a swift, involuntary tightening.
And I knew that the place rattled some old memory in him, though whether of triumph or of dread I could not say. "Sit," said Holmes, indicating the chair by the desk. Ashcombe resisted for an instant, then let himself drop with a stiff-armed motion. The two officers stood behind him. Lestrade hovered at the door, eyes bright as a terrier's. Holmes drew the grey letter from his pocket and laid it on the blotter. "You will recognize your own handiwork?" said he. Ashcombe's eyes flickered over it without a shadow of surprise. "I recognize paper," he answered. "I do not recognize lies." Holmes's eyebrows lifted. "Then you deny writing it?" "I deny nothing that can be proven," said Ashcombe, and his mouth twisted into a bitter smile. "You may hang me for whatever you like, Mr. Holmes, but you will need more than a child's story and a torn coat to do it." "You will have more," said Holmes pleasantly. "You have already provided it." He turned to Lestrade. "Inspector, you will observe the fresh lime dust upon his cuffs and boots. It matches the mortar on the outer ladder and this coping. It did not exist here yesterday, therefore he used the path tonight, and likely used it on Wednesday. You will also observe that his right hand is bruised upon the knuckles despite the break. Those bruises are older than the break and correspond to a struggle on brick and bottle glass. Furthermore, Watson, may I trouble you?" I took from my pocket the locket Lestrade had given us. Holmes opened it, showing the dented hinge. "Mr. Ashcombe forced this open in the cutting," said he. "The hinge bears a minute notch identical to the pry mark on that false compartment in the desk. Both were made by the same thin blade. I found such a blade in your pocket when you struggled. It is now in my hand." He held up a small, flat penknife, its edge stained faintly brown. Ashcombe's nostrils flared. He looked for the first time uncertain. "You are very clever," he said slowly. But cleverness is not justice. What is this to do with Miss Hargreaves? I came for my niece's property. That is no crime. Not until you murder to secure it, said Lestrade hotly. Ashcombe turned his cold eyes on him. Murder? I did not kill that woman. Holmes's gaze narrowed. You would have us believe that you climbed to her window to lock her door, and then politely declined to harm her. Ashcombe's lips tightened. For a second he said nothing. Then with a kind of fierce deliberation he spoke. I climbed to her window because she failed to come at 10. I had given her a warning. She did not appear. I had to know whether she intended betrayal or whether she had roused the police. So I went to her room. She was not there. The window was unlatched for me because she had heard my signal. I entered. I found the letter hidden in the false bottom, which told me she feared me. I locked the door to delay any alarm while I searched for the child. That is all. You expect us to accept that she was already in the garden? I cried. I expect you to accept that she was gone, he snapped. She may have slipped down to meet me. She may have gone to fetch the brat. I did not see her alive. I left by the same way I came. When I reached the coping, I heard a train below, and then a scream. One scream, I looked over. She was falling. Lestrade swore under his breath. Holmes held up a hand. Continue, Mr. Ashcombe. Your lie will be most instructive if you complete it. Ashcombe's eyes flashed. You call it a lie because it does not suit your neat tale, but the truth is not neat. I did not touch her. She must have slipped on the roof or the wall when she climbed to see what I showed her. The blood on the coping was mine from the glass. I was not even on the shed when she fell. I was on the outer ladder. Conveniently placed to hear her scream, but not to prevent her fall, Holmes said dryly. And what did you show her to draw her so far? Ashcombe hesitated, and in that hesitation there was a crack, through which I glimpsed a deeper motive than he had yet admitted. I showed her proof, he said at last. Proof that the child was mine to claim, a copy of my uncle's will, and a letter from Lady Ashcombe herself. From Sarah Hartwell, you mean? Holmes corrected. Ashcombe stiffened. Call her what you please. She was my uncle's wife. She had no right to steal his child. His child, Holmes repeated softly. So you admit there was a child. You admit it was not dead in infancy. You admit that you knew it had survived. Ashcombe's jaw worked as if he had tasted something foul. I knew she lived because Sarah wrote to me 2 years ago begging money. I refused. She threatened that the girl's existence would ruin me. I said let it. She fled instead. She had always been melodramatic. When she died, I presumed the child would sink into the gutter where such illegitimate things belong. Months ago I learned she had been placed at this school. I tried the charitable approach through Berkeley. The priest refused. Then I did what I had to do. Wrote a threat to a schoolmistress and spoke over a wall to an 8-year-old child, said Holmes. That is what you are proud to call necessity. Ashcombe's face darkened. You speak of pride. What do you know of it? My uncle's estate is tied to my bloodline. If a bastard girl of a dead woman inherits, the name Ashcombe dies with me. I acted for the honour of my family. Honour, Holmes echoed, and there was ice in his voice. I have seen honour used to cover many kinds of dirt. Now tell me this. If you did not kill Clara Hargreaves, who did? Ashcombe's head snapped up. His eyes were suddenly wary, almost hunted. I don't know. You saw no one else in the garden? No. No movement on the wall. No shadow by the shed? He shook his head once, sharply, but I saw sweat bead along his hairline. Holmes leaned closer, his face a pale, intent oval in the lamplight. Mr. Ashcombe, you are telling me part of the truth. You climbed the wall, you entered this room, you locked the door, you threatened her, but something in your account turns strangely. You say you were on the ladder when she fell, yet the train stopped at 10:07 because a cord was pulled. Who pulled it, and why? He paused. A man who means escape does not halt his own escape.
Ashcombe stared at him, and for the first time his arrogance faltered into something else, an unwilling fear. "I didn't pull any cord," he said hoarsely. "I never touched the train." Holmes straightened slowly. "Then there was another man in the cutting at that instant," said he.
A man who wanted the train to stop, a man who wanted time with the body, or with what the body carried. His eyes flashed to the locket in my hand. "You opened this and found nothing, yet you still returned tonight. Why? Because you believed something else existed, some other token of proof. You did not come for the child alone. You came for a document." Ashcombe's breathing quickened. "You are very near the edge of something you do not understand," he muttered. "And you are very near the edge of Newgate," Lestrade growled. Holmes waved him to silence. He looked at Ashcombe, not as a policeman looks at a prisoner, but as a chess player looks at a piece that might still be turned. "Mr. Ashcombe," said he, "if you speak fully now, you may yet save yourself from the worst. Clara Hargreaves did not die by accident. Her body was dead before it struck the ground. That means a hand struck her, or a poison stilled her above the cutting. If it was not your hand, it belongs to another who has walked between you and the child. Who is that man?" Ashcombe's lips parted. He seemed to struggle with himself as much as he had struggled with us on the roof. Then the sound of a door opening below drifted faintly upward, and he flinched as if the house itself had spoken a threat. "I will tell you nothing more," he said suddenly, hoarse and defiant. "You may lock me in your cell and pat yourself on the back, but you'll not keep her. He will take her from you, as he took her from that woman. And when he does, remember I warned you that your window opens farther than you think." Holmes held his gaze a moment longer, then nodded to Lestrade. "Take him," said he quietly. "Charge him with coercion, breaking and entering, and murder, if you choose, but keep him alive and within reach. We are not yet at the end." Ashcombe was hauled up, resisting now only with words. As he passed me, he leaned close enough that I felt his breath. "Find her papers," he whispered, almost viciously. "If you don't, London will never see that child again." Then he was gone down the stairs between the officers, Lestrade bustling after him with a satisfaction considerably dimmed by uncertainty. Holmes stood by the desk, staring at the broken lock, the neat bed, the open window that was now shut. The lamp cast his shadow long across the floor, and in that shadow I read the shape of a new danger forming. "You believe him?" I asked softly. Holmes did not turn.
"I believe that a man who lies for advantage will sometimes speak truth from terror," he said. "Ashcombe did not kill Clara Hargreaves. He intended to frighten her, not to silence her. Someone else intervened, someone who needs the child and whatever proof she carries more urgently than he does. And that someone is still free." Holmes's eyes lifted to the dark pane. "Yes," said he, and his voice had grown very low. "And now that Ashcombe is in chains, that someone has no more masks left. We have forced the game into the open. Tonight, we watch Elsie as if she were the crown jewels, because by dawn, Watson, an invisible hand, will reach again for what it thinks is its rightful prize." The arrest of Edward Ashcombe brought no sense of conclusion to that troubled house. Indeed,
As the clatter of boots faded down the stairs and the front door closed upon Lestrade's departing men, a deeper quiet settled, one of those silences which feel not like rest, but like the held breath before a second blow. Holmes moved at once with the brisk economy of a man who has already fitted the next piece into his mind. "Mrs. Toller," said he, "you will return to your duties as though nothing has occurred. You understand me?" The cook looked bewildered. "As though, sir, there's been a struggle on my shed roof and a gentleman hauled away in irons." "Precisely. And if you behave as though the world is ending, you will tell our unseen visitor that we are on watch. He will then wait, and waiting is his advantage. If you behave as though the world is stubbornly ordinary,
he may be tempted to act while he believes you careless." She swallowed and nodded, though her hands fluttered about her apron as if to contradict her. "And you, Martha," Holmes continued, turning to the maid, "will put the girls to bed at their usual time. You will read them their prayers. You will not mention Mr. Ashcombe's name. Most especially, you will not mention it to Elsie." Martha's eyes were round. "But she saw you in the garden, sir." "She saw a lamp and heard voices," Holmes replied. "Children see what adults tell them to see. Tell her it was a tradesman's quarrel or a stray dog. Any commonplace. You have imagination enough to be a maid, I presume." She coloured, but curtsied and went. Holmes looked to Mr. Hargreaves, who had stood through the whole scene with the drained,
stunned look of a man who has had his world rearranged too quickly to count the furniture. "You will remain here tonight," Holmes said. "Not in your sister's room. Choose a bed near the girls. You are their uncle-in-law, if not in blood. The sight of a familiar face will calm them, and your presence will prevent unwise wanderings." Mr. Hargreaves drew a breath, as if this were the first practical duty that had been offered him since Clara's death. "Whatever you say, Mr. Holmes. Whatever helps." "Good. Now leave us for a moment." When he had gone, Holmes shut the door of the little parlour behind us and lowered his voice. "Watson, we must reverse the villain's perspective. Ashcombe was a known competitor to the child's claim. If another man is moving in this business, he has not done so to help Ashcombe. He has done so to supplant him.
Clara Hargreaves died because she stood between that man and possession of Elsie, or of Elsie's proof. Therefore we must ask, what proof might a child carry which would outweigh the value of the child herself? "The locket," said I, "but Ashcombe found it empty." "Empty to him. Not necessarily empty before he opened it." Holmes tapped his fingers lightly on the mantel. "A lock forced in haste scatters little things. Hair, a folded scrap, a miniature. The cutting is a hungry mouth for trifles. Yet Ashcombe returned tonight under the belief that more existed. Where did he gain that belief? Not by his own disappointment. Someone put it into him." "You think he has an accomplice?" "No, he is too arrogant for partnership. But he might be too arrogant for caution as well. Suppose he met another claimant."
Another actor, someone who had been hovering in the shadows of the Ashcombe estate. Such a person might hint that Sarah Hartwell left documents with the child. Hinting costs nothing and inflames a man like Ashcombe into rashness. That rashness could be used as cover. While he threatened and climbed, another watched, ready to profit from the confusion. He paused. The emergency cord on the freight, that was pulled not by Ashcombe, but by someone else who wished to halt the train at 10:07. Why halt it? To search the cutting without a passing engine, to betray him, perhaps, or to lift something from the body before it could be found at daylight. That someone was on the path below at the very instant Clara fell. A faint shiver went through me at the cold patience of such a design. Then this second man was waiting for the murder? Waiting for the result of a struggle he had engineered, yes. The man by the wall after supper may not have been Ashcombe at all. A clever criminal will delegate the crude work to the man most likely to be suspected. Who else knew Elsie's name and past? Reverend Berkeley saw only one visitor. Visitors to parishes are like teardrops in the sea. Berkeley noticed the man because of his card. Another might not require so bold an entry. And recall Dr. Reeves's fever talk. Sarah said he opened it once, and don't let him open it. That is not the language of a woman describing one pursuer only. It is the language of a woman remembering an older trauma. Perhaps, Watson?
Sarah fled not only from a greedy nephew, but from a husband whose own hands were stained. You don't mean Sir Julian Ashcombe? Holmes's eyes sharpened. Why should a respectable baronet's wife run into the parish gutters with her child? Mere talk of inheritance does not produce such terror. If her marriage were cruel, or if Julian feared that the child was not his, or if some scandal lay at the root, the flight becomes more urgent. Sarah died before she could speak. But there may be another who knows. Jonas Larkin is a solicitor tied to Berkeley. I do not exonerate him. And there is also the question of Violet Larkin's arrival. A new pupil arriving at the school may provide opportunity to remove Elsie in the noise of introduction. The second man knows this and may be timing his move accordingly. I began to reply. But the faint creak of the stair broke in upon us. Holmes's head turned and his eyes went to the door as a cat's goes to a mouse hole. A moment later, Martha entered with a candle. "Begging your pardon, sir," she whispered, "but Elsie's asking for Miss Clara. She says she saw a gentleman in the garden and wants to know if he was sent by her mamma." Holmes's jaw set, but his voice remained gentle. "Bring her to me, quietly." The child came in with her doll under one arm, its rag face pressed against her neck. Her eyes were swollen from crying, yet there was a small, stubborn light in them, as though the night's terrors had woken not only fear, but curiosity. She looked at Holmes with that mixture of trust and suspicion which children reserve for strangers who speak kindly, but look too knowing. "You are Mr. Holmes," she said.
I am. Agnes says you catch bad men? Sometimes. Was that bad man in the garden sent by my mamma? Holmes knelt so that his face was level with hers. Elsie, do you remember your mamma? She shook her head. Only a little. She smelled of soap and roses, and she said I must be brave. And your locket, did she give it to you? Yes, sir. She said never to take it off, not even for Miss Clara, but it got broke. Have you ever opened it yourself? No, I don't know how. But someone opened it last night? Tears welled again. A man, he grabbed me. He said he would take me home if I was good. I screamed and I ran, and then I heard a train and a loud noise, and I think I fell down because I woke up in Mrs. Toller's arms. Holmes's eyes flicked to me for an instant, and I knew he was marking each syllable. Did he say his name? No, he said I was little Eliza once. I told him I was Elsie, and he laughed. He said, "You'll learn the right name soon enough." That phrase struck like a spark. Holmes's hand tightened lightly on her shoulder. "Eliza," he repeated softly. "Not Elsie." She nodded miserably. He had a funny voice, like he was smiling but not really, and his coat smelled of horses. "Horses," Holmes murmured. "A stable, perhaps, or a carriage yard." He smoothed her hair with an awkward tenderness. "Elsie, you have been very brave. You must be brave a little longer. You will stay inside tonight with Mrs. Toller and Mr. Hargreaves. No matter what you hear outside, voices, taps, even your name, you will not go to the garden. Do you understand?" She looked up earnestly. "If my mamma comes?" "If anyone comes," he said firmly.
"Your mamma would never ask you to do what is dangerous. Promise me." Her small chin lifted. "I promise." "Good. Now take your doll and go to bed. Miss Clara would wish you to sleep." At the mention of her mistress, she faltered, then nodded and let Martha lead her away. Holmes rose and began to pace the parlour, his movements quick, almost restless. "Eliza," he said again, "that is not a random slip. It is a name connected to the Ashcombe line. Sarah Hartwell was Lady Ashcombe. If she named the child Eliza to honour an ancestor, a man in the family might know it. Ashcombe called her Elsie because that was the alias she lived under. This other man called her Eliza because he knows the truth more intimately. Then he may be from the Ashcombe household itself, or from its servants. Horses suggest a groom, coachman,
or someone who frequents stables. Sir Julian had Ashcombe Hall with its own yard. A conspirator from there could be pressing his own claim, perhaps illegitimate, perhaps forged, using the child as leverage. He might even be the true father, if Sarah's marriage was less simple than the Gazette implied. A knock sounded below, and a moment after the housekeeper entered, flurried. "There is a gentleman at the front, sir. He says he is from St. Bride's Children's Aid, and he must speak to Elsie at once. He has proper papers." Holmes went very still. Then the old fierce light came into his face, so sudden that it startled me. "Show him into the front parlour," he said quietly. Do not bring the child. Do not say she is here. And madam, leave the door unlatched behind you." When she had gone, he turned to me. "Watson, the game is open indeed. The second hand has reached early. Come with me, and keep your revolver ready but unseen. We shall hear what a charity gentleman has to say at this hour to a house of mourning." We crossed the hallway. The front parlour was lit and stiffly arranged, its furniture covered with antimacassars, and its air smelling faintly of potpourri. A man stood by the window with his back to us, tall and square-shouldered. At the sound of our entrance he turned, and for a flicker of time I thought I saw shock pulse across his features before he mastered it. He was perhaps 40, broad in the jaw, with a careful beard and eyes set rather too close for ease. His clothes were respectable, but there was a faint roughness at the cuff and boot that spoke of country work more than London polish. When he smiled, it did not reach his eyes. "Mr. Holmes," said he smoothly, "you are, I see, already involved. That will spare explanations. I am Mr. Gideon Shaw, Secretary to St. Bride's Children's Aid Society. We have at last traced little Eliza Ashcombe, known here, I understand, as Elsie Hatherley. I am authorized to remove her to her lawful guardian without delay." Holmes folded his arms. "Authorized by whom?" "By the trustees of the Ashcombe estate." "Name them." Shaw's eyes narrowed a fraction. "Sir Julian's solicitor, Mr. Jonas Larkin, and the executor, Mr. Fairfax." Holmes's voice was mild as milk. "Then you will not object to waiting while I send a wire to Mr. Larkin to verify this delightful urgency." The man's jaw tightened, and I saw the flicker of irritation beneath the varnish. "There is no time for wires," he said. "The child's welfare is at stake." "You are not a guardian, Mr. Holmes. Stand aside." Holmes smiled, and in that smile there was the calm cruelty of a man who has waited for exactly such a sentence. "Mr. Shaw," said he, "you are either extraordinarily devoted or extraordinarily foolish to come here tonight after Ashcombe's arrest." Shaw's face changed, only a shade, but enough. "So you do know," Holmes continued softly. "Then you are not from St. Bride's at all. You are from Ashcombe Hall, and if I am not mistaken, you are Gideon Shaw, the former head groom, dismissed last year for gambling debts." The man's right hand darted toward his coat. I had my revolver out in the same instant, and Holmes was already between Shaw and the door. "Do not be melodramatic," said Holmes. "You are not quick enough, and besides, your pistol is not for me." "It is for the child." Shaw froze, staring from one to the other of us, his breath coming fast. The mask of charity had fallen entirely now, and the animal beneath looked cornered. "You think you've won," he hissed, "but she's mine by blood, and I'll not see her raised under another man's name." Holmes's eyes were like steel points. "Ah," said he quietly, "so we come at last to the true father." The words struck Shaw like a lash. For a second the bravado drained from his face, leaving something raw and sullen beneath, as though the careful beard and Sunday coat were only a thin skin over a stable boy's rage. His hand remained half buried in his breast, caught between impulse and the cold certainty of my revolver. "You meddling town rat," he growled. "You don't know a thing of it." "I know enough," said Holmes quietly, "to see that your lies are wearing through. You called the child Eliza. You smelled of horses. You came under the same false charity name that sought her months ago. And you came tonight, after Ashcombe's arrest, with a story too urgent to bear inspection. Those are the footprints. Now, Mr. Shaw, tell me where the road began." Shaw's eyes flicked toward the door, toward the dark hall beyond. I saw calculation there, and fear, and something like longing, as if he could already picture himself running across the garden and down into the cutting where he had once owned the night. Holmes shifted an inch, tilting his body so that the man's line of flight ended in a wall of calm grey cloth. "Spare yourself the attempt," said he. "Lestrade has a man at the back and another at the lane. You are not leaving this house without passing through honest hands." At the mention of the inspector, Shaw's jaw set. He seemed to realize that the moment for pretense had gone. Yet his pride, which was of another kind than Ashcombe's, fought hard against surrender. "If I speak," he said thickly, "it won't be to save your precious Law. It'll be for her." "For Elsie?" I asked. "For Eliza," he corrected fiercely. My Eliza, the only clean thing I ever had. Holmes nodded, and his voice softened to that rare note of understanding which he reserved for men whose crimes were rooted in human grief rather than mere greed. "You may speak for her, then, but you will speak truthfully." Shaw's shoulders sagged a fraction. He walked to a chair and dropped into it without being asked, as if the weight of his own past had suddenly become too heavy for his legs. "I was groom at Ashcombe Hall 12 years, he began. "I came up from Surrey a lad. Sir Julian was hard but fair. He'd a temper and a bottle, but he knew a horse and liked a quiet yard. Lady Ashcombe, Sarah, she was different. She was a lady, yes, but she had a way of looking at you like you was a person. Not a thing. When Sir Julian was away in London, she'd come to the stables sometimes to see the mare she rode. She'd talk. Little talk, nothing wicked at first. Then talk turned to need." He gripped the arms of the chair until the wood creaked. She was lonely. He neglected her. When he was in drink, he could be cruel. She'd show marks on her wrist now and again. I was a fool, maybe. But I'd have done anything, she asked. And she asked more than once. Holmes did not move. He let the story run as a physician lets a fever speak. "She took with child," Shaw continued. "Sir Julian thought it his. Maybe it was half his in the law's eyes, but she knew and I knew. She swore me to silence. She said if he found out he'd kill her, and the baby too. I believed it. I'd seen his eyes on a man once who crossed him. So when the girl was born, Sarah said she must be hidden. She faked a servant's tale that the child died. She bribed the nurse. She came one night to the stable and gave me a bundle wrapped in shawls. She said, 'Gideon, if you love me, take her far and keep her safe. I will follow when I can.'" His voice roughened. "I took her. I went to London under cover of taking horses to market. I had an aunt in Kentish Town. I left the baby with her. Sarah came a week later, shaking like a leaf. She'd left a letter for Sir Julian and taken what money she could. We lived quiet for a few months. She changed her name. We moved from room to room. Then Sir Julian died, and we heard Edward Ashcombe was coming into everything. Sarah was terrified. She said Edward would hunt for the child, not for love, but for the estate. She wanted to go to the church, to a man she trusted. That was Berkeley." Holmes's eyes gleamed faintly. "And you let her?" "I didn't want to, but she was set on it. She said she'd rather die poor than see Eliza taken and called a bastard all her life. She brought the child to Berkeley herself and begged him to place her safe. She was already weak. The fever was on her. After she placed Eliza, she hid with me another fortnight. Then she died. I buried her under the name Hatherley because she swore no Ashcombe name must touch her grave." He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, a stableman's gesture, clumsy and intimate. "After that I was alone. I tried to see Eliza now and then, quiet-like. Miss Hargreaves was kind, but she wouldn't give her to me. She said I had no proof. She was right. I had no paper. Only blood. So I watched from the wall. I spoke to the girl once, just to hear her voice. She didn't know me, she'd forgotten. That near broke me. But I kept away because I knew if I acted rash, I'd bring Edward down on her like a hawk." "Yet you did act rashly," Holmes said. "And you brought death with you." Shaw flinched. "I didn't mean it. God strike me if I meant it. Tell us about Wednesday." He drew a shaking breath. I'd heard Edward was looking again. "A man from the house, old Fairfax the steward, sent me word that Edward meant to get the girl one way or another. Fairfax..." He hated Edward. Said Edward would sell the Hall out from under the servants. He told me there was a will somewhere, papers Lady Ashcombe had written, proof of the child. He said he'd seen her with a locket once, putting a folded note inside. I thought if I could get that locket, I could prove she was mine and keep her. Holmes's head dipped. So Fairfax fed Ashcombe the rumour of papers, and fed you the rumour of a locket? Shaw stared. Fairfax only wanted to help. Perhaps, said Holmes with an edge. Continue. Shaw swallowed. I wrote to Miss Hargreaves, not to threaten her, but to make her bring Eliza to the garden so I could speak to her, show her I was her father, and take her away before Edward could. I used stiff words because I didn't know any other. I never meant harm to the child. I never meant harm to Clara. Lestrade's distant footsteps sounded in my mind, but Holmes stayed him with a glance, though he was not present. And the meeting? I was at the wall early. I meant to see the girl if she came out. She didn't. I heard later she'd read my letter. At 10 I waited and waited. I could see the back of the house, the window of her room. Nothing. I thought she'd fetched the police. I panicked. I climbed the ladder to her window. It was unlatched. I slipped in. The room was empty. I found her desk and the false bottom because I'd seen her use it before. I searched for the locket note. I didn't find it. I heard a sound below, like a door. I went back out the window to the shed roof, thinking to get away. He lifted his eyes to meet Holmes's, and in them there was real fear now. That's when I saw another man at the wall. Edward Ashcombe, I said. Shaw shook his head violently. No, not Edward. A broad fellow in a dark coat and cap. He was already on the coping like he'd been waiting. I knew him. Fairfax? Sir Julian's steward. Holmes went perfectly still. He was there before you returned to the shed, he said softly. Aye. He whispered harsh at me. Get down, you fool, you'll ruin it. I didn't know what he meant. Then Miss Hargreaves came out into the garden. She was carrying a lamp at first, then she set it down quick, because he hissed at her to do so. She looked frightened but brave. She came toward the wall. And Fairfax? He leaned over, talking to her in a low voice. I couldn't hear for the train coming. She climbed onto a stool he'd set by the shed so she could see over. Then he grabbed her, not gentle. She cried out. I lunged forward, but the freight was roaring and the whole world seemed to shake. He struck her, hard, with something in his hand and shoved. She went over like a sack. Shaw's voice cracked. I swear it. I was frozen. I tried to catch her, but I was too far. Then Fairfax slid down the outer side, quick as a ferret. The train squealed to a stop. He must have pulled the cord. I heard men shouting. He ran along the cutting. He stooped by where she'd fallen. I think he took the locket from her neck. Then he vanished into the dark before the railway men came. Holmes's face had grown very pale, but his voice was steady as stone. Why did Fairfax kill her? Shaw. Because she knew him, Shaw whispered. She'd seen him at the wall days before. She'd recognized him. I heard her cry his name once, Mr. Fairfax, like she was shocked. He couldn't let her live, not with what he meant to do. And what did he mean to do? Shaw looked up, and in his eyes was that last bitter understanding which comes only to a man who has been used. He meant to take Eliza for himself, not as father, as weapon. He hates Edward and wants the estate his way. He'd been steward 30 years. He thinks he knows the Ashcombes better than they know themselves. If he holds the child, he holds the claim. And he holds me too, because I'm the only one who could say the truth of her birth. He needed Clara dead, and me frightened, and Edward blamed. He got all three. A chill went through me at the cold logic of it. Holmes stepped closer, his long face hard as winter. You have done a grievous wrong, Shaw, said he, but you have also told the truth at last. Now you will help me to undo it. Where is Fairfax? Shaw's mouth opened, then closed. He seemed to heave with some inner struggle. I don't know. He's cunning, but he'll come for Eliza before dawn. He can't wait now. Edward's caught and I'm caught. He has to snatch her quick. Holmes nodded once. Then we shall be waiting. Watson, send word to Lestrade at once. Tell him to bring men to surround the house silently, and another to ride for Ashcombe Hall. Fairfax will run for his lair if he fails here. And Shaw— He turned his keen gaze on the broken man in the chair. You will come with us to Elsie. You will sit where she can see you. You will not frighten her with claims or tears. But when Fairfax appears, you will do precisely what I say. Do you understand? Shaw's shoulders slumped, and yet there was a strange relief in him too, as though confession had lifted a stone from his chest. I'll do anything, he said hoarsely. Only don't let him take her. Holmes opened the parlour door and motioned us into the hall, where the house's lamplight made long, trembling pools on the floorboards. Somewhere upstairs a child's voice murmured in sleep, and the wind moved softly against the panes. Holmes's face had that fierce, quiet focus I knew so well, the look of a man who has seen the full shape of the labyrinth and is already running its last corridor. Come, he whispered. The final door is about to open, and this time the window will not lead to nowhere. We made our way to the back parlour where Elsie had at last been coaxed to bed upon a narrow sofa, the doll tucked beneath her chin, her small face damp but peaceful in the exhaustion that only children can summon after fright. The lamp had been lowered and the curtains drawn so that no curious eye from the garden could pick out movement within. Mr. Hargreaves sat near the hearth, rigid in a chair, his hands clasped as if in prayer. When he saw Shaw behind us, his posture stiffened, then wavered, for the groom's rough country face, stripped now of its false beard and company manner, held so much naked misery that anger had no secure footing. Holmes put a finger to his lips and drew us quietly into the corner by the door. Here is our stage, he murmured. Mr. Hargreaves, you will sit where you are. Shaw, you will take that chair by the table, not nearer. I will stand behind the curtain of this inner door so that I can see the garden strip through the crack. Watson, you will place yourself by the window with your revolver ready but low. If Fairfax comes through the garden door, I need you to cut him off. If he comes by the wall, I will take him from within. And the child? I whispered. She sleeps. Let her sleep until the moment we need her wakefulness. He glanced once at Elsie, and there was something in his eyes like pity hardened into iron. We are not playing for comfort now. The minutes which followed seemed to me among the longest I have endured. The parlour held its breath. The fire ticked softly. From the schoolroom above came a faint creak, perhaps only a settling beam, perhaps a frightened girl turning on her pillow. Outside, the wind stirred the leaves in the garden with a dry whisper, as if it too were waiting to speak. Holmes, half concealed behind the door, was a shadow among shadows. Shaw sat with bowed head, his hands clenched so tightly that I could see the cords in his wrists. Mr. Hargreaves stared into the fire and did not move. At 2:30, a train passed far below. Its sound rose like distant thunder, and for a moment I felt again the cutting's dark mouth and the grim reason it had been chosen. When the rumble died, the silence that returned was sharper. Then came a sound so faint that at first I thought it part of the wind, a soft scrape, a cautious foot upon slate. Holmes's head lifted in a single, precise motion. His hand, held low at his side, tightened upon his cane. Again the scrape, this time nearer, and the faint, metallic kiss of iron against brick. Someone was upon the outer ladder. Shaw's eyes flew to Holmes, wild with fear. Holmes met them once and made a small downward gesture that meant still. The parlour door trembled slightly, not from touch, but from the vibration of climbing above. I stepped nearer the window, my revolver half raised, and peered through a narrow gap in the curtain. Against the blackness of the garden I saw the outline of a man's shoulders as he emerged above the coping. He was crouched low, moving with the practiced ease of one who has used that path before. A cap was pulled down to his ears. He paused, listening, then slid toward the shed roof. He did not see the faint glow from within. He did not hear us breathe. He was a man who believed night belonged to him. He crossed to the window of Miss Hargreaves's room, the same dark square he had used on Wednesday, and with a small instrument in his hand, he worked at the catch. Holmes moved. He flung the inner door wide and sprang forward in one long stride. The man at the window jerked round, startled but not panicked. He had the quick self-command of long habit. In the same instant he drew a pistol. I fired first. The crack in that small room sounded like a cannon in a vault. The ball tore through the man's hat brim, knocking it spinning into the corner. His pistol discharged almost together, the shot burying itself in the plaster above the mantel. Smoke hung for a breath between us. Holmes was on him before he could recover. Cane, hand, shoulder, he used all as one weapon. The man staggered back a step, slipped on the sill, and Holmes seized his coat, wrenched him bodily from the window, and hurled him into the room. They went down together with a crash of furniture. Shaw gave a hoarse cry and leaped up as if to join the struggle, but Holmes barked a single command over the tangle. "Stand back!" The man fought brutally, not with the blind flailing of a cornered thief, but with the grim economy of someone trained to wrestle and strike. He landed a blow that would have felled most men, but it glanced off Holmes's cheekbone and only sharpened that terrible, controlled fury in my friend's face. The cane snapped. Holmes drove his knee into the man's ribs, caught the wrist, holding the pistol, and with a twist that made the joint crack, broke his grip. The weapon clattered across the floor. I was upon them the next second, revolver dropped, hands at the man's shoulders. Between us we pinned him, and I struck the lamp cord so that the flame rose higher. The light fell full upon the captive's face. I saw then a broad, weathered countenance with heavy brows and a mouth set hard beneath a grizzled moustache. His hair was iron grey at the temples. There was the stamp of country authority about him, the sort bred by long command of servants and horses rather than by education. It was a face I had not seen before, but Holmes's eyes did not blink. "Mr. Fairfax," said he quietly. The man glared back, panting, his breath whistling through clenched teeth. "So," he snarled, "the spider sits in the web." Lestrade chose that moment to burst in through the garden door, with two men behind him, having been summoned by my shot. He stopped short at the scene, then surged forward with satisfaction. "We've got you, you old fox," Fairfax spat on the floor. "You've got nothing but a loyal servant who's seen too much rot to keep his mouth shut." "You will keep it shut in Newgate, then," Lestrade retorted, snapping irons on his wrists. Holmes rose, wiping blood from a cut near his jaw with his handkerchief. His breathing was steady already. He gazed down at Fairfax as a man might gaze at a specimen under glass, not with hatred, but with a scientist's cold interest. "You have been loyal only to your own ambition," said he. "You engineered this from the first. You told Ashcombe there were papers hidden with the child. You told Shaw the same. You watched them both dance to your tune while you waited to pick what fell. Clara Hargreaves recognized you on the wall. You could not allow that.
So you killed her, while the freight passed, pulled the emergency cord to stop the train, and stripped the locket from her neck to hunt for whatever proof Lady Ashcombe had placed there. When you found it gone, you returned to snatch the child herself before anyone else could." Fairfax's eyes burned. "And if I had? What then? A steward, 30 years, watching Ashcombe men gamble estates in London while the Hall rotted and we starved on promises. Sir Julian drank himself into the grave. Edward would have sold the land to pay his debts. The name was dying anyway, so I meant to save it. With the girl in hand, I could force terms. I could keep Ashcombe Hall in Ashcombe hands, even if those hands were mine." "You meant to blackmail the estate with a child," said Holmes. "That is your salvation." Fairfax's jaw tightened.
You speak like a man who has never been ruled by titled fools. Holmes's voice went low and hard. I speak like a man who has seen the cost of calling cruelty necessity. You murdered an innocent woman and would have stolen another innocent life. Your grievances may explain you, they will not excuse you. Fairfax laughed bitterly. Explain? I don't want your explanation. I want the hall. You will have a cell, said Lestrade, hauling him upright. That'll have to do. Fairfax struggled once, then went stiff, eyes darting to Shaw. You, he hissed, all this because you couldn't keep your mouth shut. Shaw stepped forward, shaking with fury and grief. Because of you she's dead. Because of you Eliza's grown without a mother. Fairfax's face twisted. A mother who lay with a groom and called it love. She shamed the hall. Shaw lunged, but Lestrade's men held him back. Holmes put out an arm across Shaw's chest. Enough, he said softly. He will not poison the air any further. The commotion had at last woken Elsie. She sat up on the sofa, blinking, her doll fallen to the floor. Her eyes moved from the policeman to the ironed man, to Shaw's stricken face, to Holmes's bloodied cheek. Confusion and fear rose in her like water. "Mr. Holmes?" she whispered. Holmes crossed to her and knelt as he had before, but now there was no time for riddles. "Elsie," said he gently, "you are safe. The bad men are gone. No one will take you tonight." She looked past him at Shaw, who had sunk into a chair as if his bones were ash. "That man," he said, "I was Eliza." Holmes nodded. "You are Eliza Ashcombe. Your mother gave you that name because she loved you and wanted you to have what was rightfully yours." Her brow crumpled. "My mother, she is dead? I am sorry, child. She died when you were very small." Elsie's lip trembled. "Then who is he?" She pointed at Shaw. Holmes did not flinch. "He is Gideon Shaw. He knew your mother very well. He has watched over you as best he could. In time, you may choose what place he shall have in your life. For tonight, you need only know that he would die to keep you safe." Elsie stared a long moment, then slipped from the sofa, crossed the rug, and stood before Shaw. He looked up, helpless as any man before a child's verdict. "You're from the stables," she said quietly. "You smell like horses." A sob shook him. "Aye, little one." "And you're my father?" Shaw's mouth opened and closed.
No words came. Elsie considered him with solemn, 8-year-old gravity, and then, to my astonishment, put her small arms around his neck. "I think I remember your voice," she whispered. "Not all of it, but some." Shaw buried his face in her hair and wept without disguise. Holmes rose and turned away, as if to give them privacy in the only manner he knew, by looking at facts instead of feelings. Lestrade, suddenly awkward, cleared his throat. "What now, Holmes? Ashcombe's in custody. Fairfax too. And the child, well, there'll be a tangle in court big enough to hang the Lord Chancellor." "There will be a tangle," Holmes agreed. "But you have your threads. Shaw will be charged for coercion and breaking and entering, perhaps given his full confession and the proof of Fairfax's greater crime.
The court will temper justice with comprehension. Ashcombe will face what he deserves for blackmail and attempted abduction. Fairfax will hang for murder." "And the estate?" Holmes's eyes drifted to Elsie, to the small head pressed against Shaw's shoulder. "The estate will pass where the law says it must. If Eliza is confirmed the child of Lady Ashcombe, as Shaw's testimony and Sarah's burial register strongly suggest, then she is the rightful heir to whatever portion the entail permits. A guardian will be appointed, likely Mr. Larkin, under Berkeley's quiet oversight. She will be raised with her name restored, and perhaps in time she may choose to keep one foot in the world of halls and another in the world of honest stables. That would be a healthier Ashcombe line than any Fairfax could have forged." Lestrade nodded, subdued now. "You've done it again." Holmes gave that faint shrug of his. We have only put a roof back on a house the wind had torn open. The credit belongs to the dead woman who acted bravely in the dark, and to a child who remembered the sound of her own truth. It was near dawn when at last we left the school. The first pale band of light was spreading over Hampstead Heath, turning the dew on the grass into a field of tiny fires. From the cutting below came the distant whistle of an early train, cheerful and ignorant of the night's wickedness. As we walked toward the cab, Holmes was silent for some time, his hands deep in his pockets, his collar turned up against the chill. "You were right about the window," I said at length. It was a mouth. It spoke of a hidden ladder and hidden motives. Holmes smiled without humour.
Windows are honest things, Watson. Men are not. A window will show you exactly what lies beyond if you cease insisting that it leads to nowhere. You pity Shaw, I ventured. I pity any man who makes a virtue of his own hunger and then discovers too late that hunger does not distinguish between bread and blood. He glanced up at the paling sky. Love, when yoked to secrecy, becomes a maze. The child wandered in it for years. We have at least found her a doorway out. The cab rattled down toward Baker Street. Behind us, the school stood quiet again, holding within its walls a new future for a little girl and a wounded man who might yet be redeemed by it. Holmes leaned back against the seat, eyes half-lidded, already drifting toward other puzzles, other fogs. "Come, Watson," said he at last,
with that unkillable lightness which always returned to him after darkness. "There is coffee to be had, and perhaps a morning paper with some fresh absurdity to correct. London will not go long without opening another window for us, and I confess that I am curious what it will show next."